Karl Popper's philosophy stands as one of the most decisive reorientations in the history of modern thought, a break from the naive confidence of logical positivism and the complacent empiricism that had come to dominate scientific philosophy. He rejected the idea that science progresses by confirming hypotheses, arguing instead that knowledge advances through the rigorous attempt to refute them. For Popper, no number of positive observations could ever verify a universal law, yet a single counterexample could falsify it. This asymmetry between verification and falsification was, in his view, the logical cornerstone of scientific reasoning. A theory, therefore, was scientific only if it was falsifiable. That is, if it made predictions that could, in principle, be proven wrong by experience. The strength of a theory lay not in its immunity to criticism, but in its exposure to risk. A statement like, "all swans are white," could be tested, but the moment a black swan was found, the theory would collapse. By contrast, vague or metaphysical claims that could not be tested were for Popper outside the domain of science, not because they were false, but because they were meaningless in the scientific sense. This conception of falsifiability marked a profound shift in how knowledge was understood. It implied that scientific knowledge was never certain, never final, but always provisional, a web of conjectures surviving only until they were replaced by better, more falsifiable ones. Popper saw this not as a weakness, but as the true source of science's strength, its openness to error and self-correction. Whereas traditional epistemology had sought secure foundations for knowledge, Popper dismantled the very idea of foundations. All knowledge, he argued, begins with problems, not with observations. We do not start by seeing, we start by wondering. The scientist, in his view, is a problem solver, a constructor of bold hypotheses that attempt to explain phenomena, followed by the critical tester who exposes them to falsification. The growth of knowledge is thus an evolutionary process, a natural selection of ideas in which false theories are eliminated, and the survivors are those that have withstood the most severe tests. Popper's rejection of induction was equally radical. He argued that no amount of observation could logically justify a universal statement. The inference from "these metals expand when heated" to "all metals expand when heated" is invalid, for it assumes what it seeks to prove. The traditional empiricist model, from Bacon to Mill, rested on this logical fallacy, the belief that repetition could generate certainty. Popper replaced this with a deductive model. We propose a hypothesis and deduce testable consequences. If the consequences fail, the hypothesis is refuted. If not, it remains tentative, open to future revision. Science, therefore, becomes an endless process of conjecture and refutation. The problem of induction is not solved, but dissolved, replaced by the recognition that certainty is not the goal. What matters is not justification, but criticism. Popper's epistemology is therefore critical rationalism, reason exercised not to defend beliefs, but to challenge them, not to construct dogmas, but to destroy them. In this sense, Popper's philosophy is profoundly optimistic and tragic at once. It is optimistic because it affirms the human capacity for progress through rational inquiry, for improvement through criticism. Yet it is tragic because it denies the possibility of final truth. There are no ultimate answers, only better questions. Knowledge grows by eliminating error, not by accumulating certainty. Every theory is a step toward truth, but none ever arrives there. Popper called this the truth-likeness or verisimilitude of theories, their approximation to the truth measured by how well they survive severe tests. Science, therefore, is a journey without end, a perpetual revolution against its own assumptions. And in this endless self-correction, Popper saw the moral dimension of rationality itself. Intellectual honesty is the willingness to admit error. His critique extended beyond epistemology into the realm of politics. In The Open Society and Its Enemies, Popper argued that the same critical attitude that sustains science must also sustain democracy. Just as there are no final truths in science, there are no final authorities in politics. Societies that claim to possess the blueprint for a perfect order, whether Plato's ideal republic, Hegel's dialectical state, or Marx's classless utopia, are, for Popper, the enemies of the open society. They substitute dogma for criticism and certainty for freedom. The open society is founded on the recognition of human fallibility. It thrives on debate, reform, and piecemeal change. It is the political expression of falsifiability, an institutional arrangement designed to allow the peaceful correction of error. Democracy, in this sense, is not the rule of the majority, but the mechanism for removing bad rulers without bloodshed. It is the political analog of the scientific method, a system of trial, error, and correction.
Popper's attack on historicism, the belief that history unfolds according to discoverable laws, was another dimension of his defense of the open society. He argued that historicism, whether in Marxist or Hegelian form, is a pseudo-scientific illusion. The future of human knowledge cannot be predicted, because the future content of knowledge depends on discoveries that have not yet been made. To predict the future course of history is to predict the future growth of knowledge, a logical impossibility. Thus, all attempts to derive political prophecy from supposed historical laws are doomed to fail. Instead of seeking destiny, we must embrace uncertainty. The task of social science is not to predict, but to understand, to identify avoidable suffering, and to design institutions that can learn from their mistakes. Popper called this piecemeal social engineering, the deliberate, incremental improvement of institutions guided by critical feedback. Utopianism, by contrast, seeks total solutions and produces totalitarianism. In The Logic of Scientific Discovery, Popper developed his most technical ideas about the structure of scientific reasoning. He distinguished between the context of discovery and the context of justification, between the psychological process by which ideas arise and the logical process by which they are tested. For him, the former was irrelevant to the philosophy of science. What mattered was not how a hypothesis was invented, but how it could be refuted. Science advances not by induction or verification, but by bold conjectures and their attempted refutations. Every empirical statement must be framed in a way that specifies what would count as falsification. This logical structure defines the demarcation between science and pseudoscience. Astrology, Marxism, and Freudian psychoanalysis, he argued, failed this test because they could explain everything and thus refute nothing. Their flexibility was their downfall. A theory that explains every outcome explains nothing. The true scientific spirit lies in the willingness to risk being wrong. Popper's thought also contains a powerful ethical implication. The courage to risk error is the foundation of intellectual integrity. To be rational is not to be infallible, but to be self-correcting. Every time a scientist designs an experiment, he or she takes a moral stand, a commitment to expose cherished beliefs to possible falsification. In this sense, science is not merely a technical enterprise, but a moral one. The scientific community embodies an ethical ideal, cooperation through criticism, unity through disagreement. It is a model for how human societies might coexist, diverse, fallible, and yet progressively self-improving. For Popper, this moral dimension of rationality unites epistemology and politics. Both depend on openness, criticism, and humility. The dogmatist seeks certainty. The rationalist seeks improvement. The former silences opponents. The latter invites them. Popper's evolutionary epistemology extended his ideas about falsification into the biological and cognitive realms. Just as species evolve by variation and selection, so do ideas. Knowledge grows through the elimination of error. Each problem gives rise to tentative solutions, which are then tested by experience and criticism. The unfit ideas are discarded. The fittest survive to generate new problems. This process, endless and creative, mirrors the dynamics of life itself. There is no fixed starting point, no ultimate justification, only an open process of adaptation. In this view, even perception is theory-laden. We do not passively receive data, we interpret them through our conceptual frameworks. The mind is not a mirror, but an organ of trial and error. Learning for Popper is thus a biological function, a strategy for surviving in an uncertain world. The search for knowledge and the struggle for life are two expressions of the same logic. His later work, including objective knowledge, deepened this biological analogy. Popper distinguished three worlds: World 1, the world of physical states; World 2, the world of subjective experiences; and World 3, the world of objective knowledge, books, theories, problems, and arguments. World 3 is not reducible to individual psychology. It has an autonomy of its own. Once an idea is articulated, it enters an independent realm where it can be criticized, modified, and transmitted. The growth of knowledge thus takes place in this objective domain through the interaction of minds with the products of previous minds. In this sense, knowledge is not merely personal, but communal, not subjective, but public. Science is the institutionalization of this process, the social mechanism by which World 3 evolves.
Popper's confrontation with other philosophers of science reveals much about the depth and distinctiveness of his position. He found himself opposed to the dominant trends of 20th century thought, both on the side of positivism and on that of relativism. The logical positivists of the Vienna Circle, who had initially inspired his interest in philosophy, sought to ground knowledge in observation and to define meaning through verification. Popper admired their rigor, but believed their project was doomed. Verification, he argued, could never secure the universality of scientific laws. No finite number of confirming instances could ever exclude future counterexamples. What was needed instead was a criterion of demarcation that separated science from pseudoscience by its openness to falsification. At the same time, he rejected the post-positivist swing toward relativism, represented later by thinkers such as Kuhn and Feyerabend, who viewed science as a collection of paradigms or traditions with no rational way to compare them. Popper stood between these extremes, neither foundationalist nor relativist, but a critical realist who believed in truth as a regulative ideal and in rational criticism as the path toward it. The debate with Thomas Kuhn is particularly illuminating. Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions portrayed science not as a steady accumulation of knowledge, but as a series of paradigm shifts, incommensurable worldviews replacing one another through sociological, psychological, and institutional forces rather than purely logical argument. Popper accepted that science experiences revolutions, but insisted that rational criticism remains the thread of continuity through them. Paradigms for him are not closed worlds, but conjectures subject to refutation. Scientific revolutions, properly understood, are not conversions of faith, but episodes in the continuous evolution of ideas through criticism. While Kuhn emphasized the stability of normal science and the discontinuity of revolution, Popper saw constant testing and challenge as the normal condition of science itself. The health of science lay precisely in its permanent revolution against dogma. Thus, he feared that Kuhn's model, if misunderstood, would legitimize irrationalism and the idea that truth is merely what a community agrees upon.
Popper's clashes with Ludwig Wittgenstein were of a different order. Wittgenstein, especially in his later period, emphasized the diversity of language games and the impossibility of grounding meaning in a universal logical structure. Popper saw this as another form of intellectual retreat, an abandonment of the critical and universal aspirations of reason. Their famous 1946 encounter at Cambridge, where Wittgenstein reportedly brandished a poker while demanding examples of moral rules, symbolized a deeper philosophical divide. Wittgenstein sought clarity through the dissolution of philosophical problems, while Popper sought progress through their solution. For Popper, philosophy's task was not therapeutic, but constructive, to formulate problems clearly and to test proposed solutions rigorously. Where Wittgenstein saw limits to language, Popper saw challenges to transcend. The two men embodied opposing temperaments, the contemplative quietist and the engaged rational reformer. Central to Popper's philosophy is his defense of objective truth as an ideal, even though absolute certainty is unattainable. He called this position critical realism. Reality exists independently of our theories, but our access to it is always mediated by conjectures. We can approach truth asymptotically through successive corrections, though never possess it completely. Truth is not a possession, but a horizon. Without the idea of truth, criticism itself would be meaningless, for to criticize a theory as false presupposes that something like truth exists to contrast it with. Thus, Popper's realism resists both relativism and skepticism. Knowledge may be fallible, but it is not arbitrary. There are better and worse explanations, more and less truth-like theories. The criterion of progress is not certainty, but improvement. The replacement of one problem situation by another that is deeper and richer. This commitment to objective truth gave Popper's thought a moral dimension. Intellectual honesty demands that we treat criticism as a friend, not as an attack. Popper's rejection of justificationism, the idea that knowledge requires ultimate grounds, led him to reinterpret the entire history of epistemology. From Descartes onward, philosophers had sought secure foundations, whether in reason, sense experience, or transcendental categories. Popper dismantled this project with a simple insight. Every justification presupposes further premises, leading to an infinite regress. The demand for certainty is self-defeating. Instead of seeking justification, we should seek error elimination. Knowledge is a process, not a structure. This shift from justification to criticism marks one of Popper's most profound contributions. It transforms epistemology from a quest for foundations into a dynamic theory of learning. We start not from indubitable truths, but from bold guesses, which survive only through the harsh discipline of criticism. Even logic and mathematics in this view are not immune to falsification, though their falsification occurs through internal inconsistency rather than empirical test.
In ethics and social philosophy, Popper extended this critical method to human affairs. Just as science progresses through the elimination of error, so societies improve through the correction of injustice. The open society, his political ideal, is one that institutionalizes criticism. Its strength lies not in the perfection of its citizens, but in its ability to detect and rectify mistakes. Popper rejected all forms of political messianism that claimed to know the end of history. The attempt to design a perfect society, he argued, always ends in tyranny, because it subordinates individual freedom to an abstract plan. True progress arises not from revolutionary blueprints, but from cautious, piecemeal reforms. We should judge policies by their consequences, not by their intentions. In this sense, Popper's liberalism is experimental. Laws and institutions are hypotheses to be tested by experience. A society that can peacefully replace its rulers and revise its policies is for him a moral and epistemological achievement. This view of politics reflects a deeper anthropological conviction.
Human beings are fallible but capable of learning. Fallibilism, the recognition of our susceptibility to error, is the foundation of both rationality and morality. It demands humility, an acknowledgement that one's own beliefs may be mistaken, and tolerance, a willingness to let others criticize them. For Popper, intolerance of criticism is the root of all intellectual and political evil. Dogmatism breeds fanaticism, while openness breeds cooperation. Thus, the defense of reason is inseparable from the defense of freedom. A free society is one that allows reason to operate publicly through argument rather than coercion. The suppression of dissent is not merely a political crime, but an epistemological sin, for it prevents the discovery of error. Popper's faith in reason was therefore inseparable from his faith in liberal democracy. His notion of piecemeal social engineering embodies this humility. Large-scale utopian schemes assume knowledge that no one can possess. They attempt to redesign society as if it were a machine with predictable responses. Popper compared this to the false logic of historicism, which imagines that the future can be deduced from historical laws. In reality, social systems are complex and adaptive. Interventions produce unintended consequences. The rational reformer should therefore proceed experimentally, changing one institution at a time and observing the effects. The guiding principle is not certainty, but learnability. Policies are conjectures, and political experiments must be reversible. This method parallels scientific testing. We learn by identifying and correcting specific errors rather than by pursuing absolute visions. The art of politics, like the art of science, lies in managing ignorance, not in claiming omniscience. Popper's intellectual courage was matched by his moral seriousness. He regarded the critical spirit not as a luxury of scholars, but as the condition of human survival. The 20th century, with its totalitarian ideologies, had shown how the hunger for certainty could destroy freedom. Both fascism and communism were, in his eyes, modern forms of the tribal mindset, the longing to submit to a collective destiny rather than confront the uncertainty of liberty. The open society, by contrast, is an adventure into the unknown. It requires individuals who can bear insecurity, who prefer the risks of freedom to the comfort of dogma. Popper saw himself as continuing the Enlightenment project of rational humanism, yet with a tragic awareness of its limits. Reason cannot guarantee happiness or peace, but it can help us avoid needless suffering. The greatest achievement of civilization is not perfection, but the capacity to learn without violence. In his philosophy of mind and knowledge, Popper's three worlds theory offered a bridge between realism and humanism. By distinguishing between physical objects, mental states, and objective knowledge, he avoided both materialist reductionism and idealist subjectivism. World 3, the world of ideas, theories, and arguments, has emergent properties that cannot be reduced to neurons or sensations. Once created, ideas acquire a life of their own. They can surprise, inspire, or destroy their creators. This autonomy of World 3 explains how culture accumulates knowledge independently of any single mind. Books, scientific models, and mathematical proofs persist beyond their authors, interacting with new generations of thinkers. Human progress thus depends on maintaining open access to this world through education, freedom of expression, and the preservation of intellectual heritage. The destruction of books or censorship of ideas is, for Popper, not merely cultural vandalism, but an assault on the very process of knowledge growth.
Popper's evolutionary epistemology situates this growth within the broader context of nature itself. Just as organisms adapt through the elimination of unfit variations, so does thought evolve through the elimination of error. This analogy extends even to perception and cognition. The brain, he suggested, is an organ of hypotheses, constantly anticipating the world and revising its expectations when they fail. Learning is the correction of mistaken anticipations. Thus, the mind does not passively receive sensory data, but actively interprets them, testing its own models against experience. This view unites biology, psychology, and epistemology in a single framework. Life and knowledge are both processes of adaptation under pressure of error. To exist is to guess, and to remain alive is to correct those guesses. Popper's realism, however, was not naive. He knew that observation is theory-laden, that we never encounter the world without conceptual mediation. Yet he refused to let this insight slide into relativism. The fact that our knowledge is structured by theories does not mean that all theories are equal. Some fit reality better than others, as shown by their capacity to make risky predictions that survive testing. The world pushes back against our expectations. Resistance is the measure of objectivity. This is the heart of Popper's critical realism. The world is real enough to refute us. The discovery of error is therefore a triumph of contact with reality, not a defeat. Every falsification is a moment of truth. Popper's influence on the philosophy of science extended well beyond his own lifetime, shaping debates about realism, rationality, and the nature of progress. He stood as a persistent opponent of any intellectual movement that sought to dissolve objectivity into mere sociology. Against the idea that science is just another social construction, Popper maintained that there are genuine standards of rationality rooted in the logic of discovery. These standards do not depend on consensus, but on the capacity of theories to withstand refutation. The social structure of science, with its journals, peer review, and replication, exists precisely to institutionalize this critical process. Science, in its best form, is the most self-correcting social system ever devised. Popper saw this not as an accident, but as the institutional embodiment of critical rationalism itself, organized skepticism as a way of life. This notion of critical rationality distinguishes Popper from both traditional rationalism and empiricism. The traditional rationalist trusted reason as a source of certain truths. The empiricist trusted experience. Popper trusted neither in that sense. He believed reason could err, and that experience could mislead. Critical rationalism means using reason not to justify beliefs, but to criticize them. It is the intellectual stance that says, I may be wrong and you may be right. Through discussion, we may get closer to the truth. It is the humility of reason rather than its arrogance. This attitude is not confined to science. It is the foundation of civilization. When individuals and institutions learn to prefer argument over violence, persuasion over coercion, and truth-seeking over victory, they enact the principle of critical rationalism in social form. Thus, Popper's philosophy is at once epistemological and ethical. A vision of reason as the practice of mutual correction among fallible beings. This conception places communication and dialogue at the heart of human progress. For Popper, criticism is the highest form of respect because it assumes that the other is capable of reason. To shield an idea from criticism is to degrade it. Education, therefore, must cultivate the courage to question and the patience to listen. Popper's view of learning rejects authoritarian models of instruction. Knowledge cannot be transmitted as a finished product, but must be recreated through the learner's own process of conjecture and error correction. The good teacher is not a dispenser of truths, but a stimulator of questions. Every student, like every scientist, advances through mistakes. The classroom becomes a miniature open society, a space of rational cooperation governed by criticism rather than dogma. In this sense, Popper's educational philosophy is the moral extension of his epistemology. The concept of verisimilitude, or truth-likeness, represents Popper's attempt to reconcile fallibilism with progress. If no theory can ever be proven true, How can science advance toward truth? Popper answered that while absolute truth is unattainable, comparative truth is meaningful. Some theories are closer to the truth than others because they capture more aspects of reality and make more precise predictions. When a new theory explains everything its predecessor did and also accounts for phenomena the old one could not, it possesses greater verisimilitude. Thus, even in a world without certainty, there is rational growth. This idea preserves the possibility of objective progress without sacrificing the humility of fallibilism. Science does not march toward omniscience, but gropes toward deeper adequacy. Each generation inherits not truth, but problems, and the measure of progress lies in the depth of those problems.
Popper's intellectual temperament was shaped by his historical experience. Having lived through the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the rise of Nazism, and the upheavals of the 20th century, he understood the fragility of reason in a world driven by passion and ideology. He fled Vienna for New Zealand and later settled in Britain, carrying with him the memory of societies that had surrendered to certitude. His critique of totalitarianism was therefore not merely theoretical, it was born of lived catastrophe. The same logic that drives a scientific theory to resist falsification drives an ideology to resist criticism, with far bloodier consequences. Popper saw in the cult of historical necessity the intellectual seed of tyranny. The dream of inevitability, that history must unfold in a certain way, erases human freedom and moral responsibility. Against this dream, he set the open society, a world without prophetic certainties, where the future depends on our choices, not on laws of destiny. In that sense, Popper's defense of democracy is epistemological as much as moral. A democratic society institutionalizes the principle of falsifiability. Leaders can be removed without violence, policies can be criticized without fear, and institutions can adapt through feedback. The rule of law is the social analog of the scientific method. Rules known in advance, open to revision, and binding on all. Just as science thrives on criticism, democracy thrives on opposition. A government that suppresses dissent undermines its own rationality. For Popper, the ultimate justification of democracy is not that the majority is wise, but that it allows the correction of mistakes without catastrophe. It is, as he wrote, the worst form of government except for all the others, precisely because it treats politics as an experiment rather than a revelation. Popper's rejection of historicism led him to reinterpret the role of social science. He argued that the task of sociology, economics, and political theory is not to predict the course of history, but to analyze causal mechanisms and unintended consequences. The attempt to prophesy historical trends, whether of inevitable progress or inevitable collapse, is logically incoherent. Because future knowledge changes future behavior, no prediction about human history can be fully self-consistent. The only rational attitude toward history is critical analysis of particular problems. Popper called this situational logic, understanding human actions in terms of the situations and aims agents face, rather than attributing them to historical necessity. This method allows social science to remain empirical and explanatory without becoming prophetic. It rescues social inquiry from the illusions of determinism. Popper also advanced a subtle critique of relativism in the humanities. He acknowledged that different cultures have different traditions and perspectives, but he denied that this entails the equality of all beliefs. The value of a tradition lies in its openness to criticism. Cultures that allow internal reform through debate and reasoning are superior not because of their origin, but because of their capacity for self-correction. Thus, the universalism of reason is not imperialism, but humility, the willingness to submit one's own customs to the same standards of criticism as others. Popper's universalism is pluralistic. It does not claim that there is one right way to live, but it insists that any way of life must permit questioning.
The moral core of the open society is therefore not a particular set of values, but the procedure of criticism itself. In his later years, Popper reflected increasingly on the metaphysical implications of his philosophy. Though a secular thinker, he saw the critical attitude as a spiritual posture, an expression of awe before the mystery of reality. The universe is not a closed system of deterministic laws, but an open process of emergence. Creativity in nature and in thought cannot be reduced to prediction. Each discovery generates new possibilities unforeseen by previous knowledge. This openness extends to the cosmos itself. Evolution, consciousness, and culture are unfolding experiments whose outcomes are not preordained. In that sense, Popper's philosophy contains a quiet metaphysics of hope. The future is genuinely open because knowledge can grow. The only fatalism he rejected was the fatalism of despair. His conception of metaphysical realism, the belief in a reality independent of observers, coexists with an epistemological fallibilism that recognizes our partial grasp of it. Popper often compared human knowledge to a searchlight moving through darkness. The light reveals what it touches, but its very movement depends on the surrounding night. Ignorance is not the enemy of knowledge, but its context. The more we learn, the more we uncover the vastness of what we do not know. This humility before the unknown gives his philosophy its ethical depth. For Popper, the recognition of ignorance is the first step toward wisdom. Intellectual arrogance, whether in science, politics, or religion, blinds us to error and invites catastrophe. Thus, the rational life is one of perpetual questioning, guided by the twin virtues of courage and modesty.
Popper's defense of the autonomy of World 3, the realm of objective knowledge, also led him to reinterpret the relation between mind and matter. The products of thought, mathematical theories, artistic compositions, scientific laws, acquire an objective existence that can influence the physical and mental worlds. Ideas change behavior, technologies reshape environments, and books alter consciousness. In this way, World 3 interacts causally with World 1, the physical, and World 2, the psychological. This triadic model allows us to understand how culture evolves independently yet remains anchored in material and mental realities. It also provides a philosophical framework for understanding human freedom. While our actions are constrained by physical and biological conditions, the creation and communication of ideas open new possibilities not determined by those conditions. Freedom, in Popper's sense, is the capacity to let ideas fight in our place, to replace violence with argument. This concept of intellectual combat through criticism embodies Popper's lifelong opposition to dogma. Dogmatism, whether in science or politics, is the refusal to risk refutation. It disguises fear as certainty. To cling to an untestable belief is to renounce responsibility for learning. Popper's ethic of criticism demands the opposite, the courage to expose one's most cherished convictions to potential defeat. In science, this courage manifests as the formulation of bold hypotheses that might fail. In personal life, it means the willingness to admit mistakes and revise judgments. For Popper, this moral attitude is the ultimate expression of reason. Rationality is not a possession, but a discipline of self-criticism. The open mind is not empty, it is vigilant. The moral resonance of Popper's thought becomes clearest when one considers his view of history. He refused to believe that history has a meaning, yet he affirmed that human beings can create meaning through the choices they make. The absence of cosmic purpose does not entail despair. It opens the space for freedom. The task of humanity is not to discover destiny, but to invent it. Every improvement in knowledge, every reform in law, every act of honest criticism contributes to this open project. In a world without predetermined ends, responsibility becomes sacred. Popper's rationalism is therefore existential in spirit. It affirms that life has no guarantee of success, but that striving for truth and justice gives it value. The tragic and the hopeful coexist in his vision, a world without certainties but full of possibilities. Popper believed that the power of science lay not in its ability to generate certainty, but in its capacity to eliminate error. To him, knowledge was not a collection of verified truths, but a dynamic network of hypotheses constantly tested against experience. Each falsified theory cleared the way for a more refined conjecture. And this endless cycle of testing was for Popper the essence of intellectual progress. This process meant that even the most well-established scientific laws were not immune to criticism. Newton's laws, Einstein's relativity, or any future framework were all steps in an infinite process of approximation toward truth. In this sense, truth existed as a guiding ideal, what Popper called a regulative principle, but it was never something we could fully possess. Human knowledge was inherently fallible, and recognizing this fallibility was what made genuine progress possible. For Popper, the tragedy of dogmatism was that it mistook temporary success for final truth. Whenever a society, institution, or thinker began to treat their theories as untouchable, the process of learning ceased. A closed system of thought, whether political or scientific, could only stagnate. This is why he saw his epistemological principles as inseparable from his political philosophy. The open society, he argued, was the social counterpart to scientific method, a structure in which ideas could be freely criticized, where institutions were designed to be corrected without revolution, and where no authority claimed infallibility. Just as scientific theories must remain falsifiable, social and political systems must remain open to reform. This connection between epistemology and politics was not abstract for Popper. It was deeply historical. He lived through 2 world wars, the collapse of empires, and the rise of totalitarian regimes. He saw firsthand how ideologies built on the illusion of certainty led to oppression and destruction. Marxism, fascism, and even certain forms of nationalism all shared the same epistemological flaw. They claimed to possess absolute knowledge of historical laws or moral truth. Once such a claim was accepted, dissent became heresy. Popper's antidote was not skepticism or relativism, but critical rationalism, the belief that reason's greatest strength lies in its capacity to question itself.
Critical rationalism for Popper was a living attitude. It meant embracing reason not as a static tool of deduction, but as an active practice of self-correction. It required humility before the unknown, the courage to admit error, and the willingness to change one's mind. Popper often emphasized that rationality was not a property of individuals, but of social interaction. No one mind could ever see its own blind spots, but through dialogue, debate, and criticism, error could be exposed. Science, in this sense, was a social institution of organized skepticism, a cooperative enterprise built on the mutual recognition of fallibility. In The Logic of Scientific Discovery, Popper developed his famous notion of falsifiability as the defining criterion of scientific statements. Theories, he argued, should not be judged by how well they can be confirmed, but by how boldly they make claims that can be tested and possibly refuted. A good theory takes risks. It exposes itself to potential falsification by predicting specific outcomes that, if not observed, would prove it wrong. This principle separated genuine science from pseudoscience. For example, Einstein's general relativity made precise predictions about the bending of light near massive bodies, predictions that could be tested during the solar eclipse. In contrast, Freudian psychoanalysis or Marxist historical materialism could explain any event retrospectively but could not specify what would falsify them. They were, in Popper's view, unfalsifiable and thus unscientific. Yet Popper's falsifiecism was not as simple as replacing verification with refutation.
he recognized that science operates in a complex web of assumptions, instruments, and background theories. A single failed experiment does not necessarily destroy a theory, since the fault might lie in the experimental setup or auxiliary hypotheses. What mattered was the attitude of the scientist, the readiness to treat anomalies seriously and to modify or abandon theories when they repeatedly fail to match experience. The boundary between legitimate science and pseudoscience was therefore not mechanical, but ethical. It depended on intellectual honesty and openness to criticism. In this view, science became a model for rational life itself. Popper extended the logic of conjecture and refutation to every domain of human thought. Ethics, politics, and even personal beliefs, he argued, should be approached through the same critical lens. We can never be certain of our values or policies, but we can identify when they produce harm or contradiction, and we can improve them through discussion and reform. The goal of reason is not to establish an unshakable foundation, but to build better approximations of truth and justice over time. Progress, for Popper, was a moral commitment to learn from error. He often contrasted this with the intellectual legacy of historicism, the belief that history follows deterministic laws that can be discovered and predicted. Historicists like Hegel and Marx, Popper argued, transformed the scientific desire for explanation into a quasi-religious faith in destiny. By claiming to foresee the inevitable direction of history, they justified authoritarian control in the present. Popper countered that history is shaped by human action and knowledge, both of which evolve unpredictably. Because new knowledge cannot be predicted by definition, the future of history cannot be known in advance. This argument not only dismantled the logic of historicism, but also defended human freedom. If history is open, then so are we. The open society was therefore more than a political slogan. It was a philosophical necessity. An open society institutionalizes criticism. It creates mechanisms like free speech, elections, and independent courts precisely to allow self-correction without violence. Just as science progresses through conjecture and refutation, democracy progresses through debate and reform. Popper warned that even democracies could fall into the trap of utopian engineering, the attempt to impose a perfect order based on a single vision of the good. Such attempts, however noble in intention, inevitably suppress dissent and produce tyranny. The proper task of politics was not to make heaven on earth, but to reduce suffering. Instead of asking who should rule, we should ask how can we minimize harm by limiting power. Popper's emphasis on piecemeal social engineering reflected his deep distrust of grand ideological systems. He believed that large-scale revolutions, guided by abstract theories of history or justice, tended to ignore the complexity of social life. Real progress came from gradual, experimental reforms, testing policies as scientists test hypotheses, keeping what works and discarding what fails. This method required patience, tolerance, and the moral courage to admit mistakes. It was the political embodiment of the scientific ethos.
His epistemology also extended into the philosophy of mind and evolution. In his later work, Popper described knowledge as an emergent property of biological systems, a product of evolutionary adaptation. Just as organisms evolve through natural selection, ideas evolve through trial and error. Each problem generates tentative solutions, which are then tested against reality. The unsuccessful ones are eliminated, while the successful ones survive and form the basis for new challenges. This evolutionary epistemology portrayed learning as a natural process of problem-solving, shared across life forms. Even the simplest organism exhibits a rudimentary form of conjecture and refutation when it adapts to its environment. From this perspective, human reason is the latest and most complex expression of a universal biological principle. Knowledge grows not by accumulating justified beliefs, but by eliminating error. The mind, like evolution, advances through the destruction of what fails. This insight dissolved the old dichotomy between rationalism and empiricism, showing that reason and experience are intertwined in a larger evolutionary drama. Popper's view of knowledge was therefore neither foundational nor relativistic. It was dynamic, adaptive, and open-ended. The ethical implications of this were profound. If knowledge grows through error correction, then moral growth must as well. The virtuous society is not one that claims to be just, but one that allows injustice to be identified and corrected. Freedom of thought, tolerance of dissent, and institutionalized criticism are not luxuries, they are the moral engines of progress. Popper's optimism about the human capacity for improvement was cautious but real. He rejected utopias, yet he never succumbed to cynicism. For him, the open society was a fragile achievement, constantly threatened by our desire for certainty and security. Its preservation required vigilance, humility, and an unwavering faith in the power of reasoned dialogue. Popper's relationship with the philosophical community of his time was both influential and contentious. He was a rebel among philosophers of science, standing apart from both the positivists and the relativists who dominated the intellectual landscape of the 20th century. The Vienna Circle, a group of logical positivists led by figures such as Moritz Schlick and Rudolf Carnap, sought to ground all meaningful statements in empirical verification. For them, the meaning of a statement was its method of verification. What could not be verified was considered meaningless, mere metaphysics. Popper, though sharing their respect for science, thought their principle of verification was self-defeating. No universal statement could ever be conclusively verified because it always transcended finite observation. Yet such universal statements were precisely what made science possible. The positivists, he argued, were killing science with their own logic. He proposed falsifiability as a more coherent alternative. Scientific theories could never be verified, but they could be tested and refuted. By this simple inversion, Popper preserved both the rigor of science and the recognition of its fallibility. He respected empirical evidence, but he refused to tie meaning exclusively to experience. For Popper, metaphysical ideas, those that could not be empirically tested, were not meaningless. They were non-scientific, but could still be valuable as speculative frameworks that might later become testable. This broader understanding of rational inquiry opened the door for philosophy to coexist with science without being reduced to it. It was a defense of reason's creativity against the reductionism of logical positivism. His debates with Ludwig Wittgenstein revealed another dimension of his intellectual temperament. While Wittgenstein sought to dissolve philosophical problems by analyzing the way language was used, Popper insisted that genuine problems existed independently of linguistic confusion. In one of the most famous episodes in the history of philosophy, the two men clashed at a Cambridge meeting in 1946. Popper reportedly presented a paper titled, "Are There Philosophical Problems?" arguing that there were indeed real problems, not just puzzles of language. Wittgenstein, holding a poker, objected violently. The story has become almost mythical. But behind the drama was a serious divergence of vision. Wittgenstein believed that philosophy's task was therapeutic, to free us from the illusions produced by language. Popper believed it was critical, to challenge and refine our theories about the world. This distinction marked the boundary between analytic quietism and Popper's active rationalism. In The Logic of Scientific Discovery, Popper elaborated the formal structure of his epistemology. He described science as a system of hypotheses subjected to potential falsification through empirical testing. Yet he was aware that this picture oversimplified the complex life of real science.
No experiment speaks in isolation. Every test depends on auxiliary assumptions, instruments, and background theories. Thus, a falsified prediction could always be blamed on some other part of the system rather than on the theory itself.
Popper's answer to this Duhem-Quine problem was not to deny the complexity, but to insist on intellectual integrity. A scientist must be willing to trace failure honestly and not hide behind excuses. The mark of a good theory, therefore, was not its immunity to falsification, but its vulnerability to it, its capacity to risk being wrong. Popper saw scientific discovery as a creative and logical process combined. He rejected the idea that discovery was irrational or merely psychological. Instead, he proposed a logic of discovery based on the interplay between bold conjectures and severe tests. A hypothesis emerges not from observation, but from imagination, a leap into the unknown. Observation then plays the role of criticism, not creation. We invent theories to solve problems, then test them to see if they survive contact with reality. This process has no final end, no moment of perfect confirmation, because every new solution generates new problems. In Popper's words, all life is problem-solving. The growth of knowledge, like biological evolution, proceeds through variation and selective elimination. In his later works, Popper deepened this analogy into his theory of World 3. He distinguished three worlds of existence: World 1, the physical realm of material things; World 2, the subjective realm of mental states; and World 3, the objective realm of human knowledge, ideas, theories, and cultural products. Once created, World 3 objects, such as mathematical proofs or scientific laws, acquire a kind of autonomy. They interact with human minds, challenge them, and give rise to new problems. For instance, once Pythagoras discovered his theorem, it entered the landscape of objective knowledge and began to generate further discoveries, independent of any one thinker's intentions. Knowledge, therefore, had its own evolutionary life. World 3 was both a product of human creativity and a realm that transcended any single mind. This view also allowed Popper to address the ancient problem of the relationship between mind and matter. He rejected both physicalism and idealism, proposing instead a form of interactionism. World 1 and World 2 influence each other. Physical events can cause mental experiences, and mental intentions can cause physical actions. World 3, meanwhile, acts as a bridge. It shapes and is shaped by both. A theory, once written down, becomes a physical object that can affect minds, leading to experiments that alter the physical world. In this triadic system, knowledge is not passive reflection, but active intervention in reality. It transforms the environment and the mind that created it. Popper's realism was equally distinctive. He argued for what he called objective knowledge, insisting that truth existed independently of human belief. This realism was essential to his philosophy of criticism. If there were no independent truth, there would be nothing to correct our errors against. To deny objective truth, he warned, was to make progress impossible. However, he also emphasized that our access to truth was always indirect and provisional. We approach it asymptotically, through successive approximations that eliminate falsehoods but never yield final certainty. This combination of realism and fallibilism was the heart of his philosophy, a belief that truth exists, coupled with the humility to admit we never fully grasp it. Popper's influence reached beyond philosophy into the practical conduct of science. He inspired generations of scientists to view their work as a process of critical testing rather than accumulation of facts. His ideas resonated especially in the fields of physics and biology, where theories constantly faced potential falsification. Yet he also faced criticism from philosophers who argued that his model was too idealized. Thomas Kuhn, for example, challenged Popper's view of science as a continuous process of conjecture and refutation.
In The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Kuhn argued that science proceeds through paradigms, frameworks of thought that define legitimate problems and methods. For long periods, scientists work within these paradigms, solving puzzles rather than testing the framework itself. Only during crises do paradigms shift, often in ways that cannot be rationally compared. Kuhn's picture seemed to make scientific change more sociological and less rational. Popper admired Kuhn's historical insight, but rejected his relativistic implications. He insisted that even paradigm shifts could be judged rationally by comparing their explanatory power and problem-solving capacity. For Popper, rationality did not require a fixed foundation. It required open criticism.
If scientists debated freely, exposing their theories to refutation, progress would still occur, even if not in a linear or mechanical way. The dialogue between Popper and Kuhn shaped modern philosophy of science, with Popper defending the ideal of critical reason and Kuhn emphasizing its historical contingencies. Popper also engaged with Imre Lakatos and Paul Feyerabend, two thinkers influenced by his ideas who later diverged from him. Lakatos attempted to reconcile Popper's falsificationism with the historical reality of science by introducing the concept of research programs. A program could survive anomalies if it continued to generate new, testable predictions. Feyerabend, by contrast, took Popper's emphasis on creativity and freedom to its radical extreme, declaring that anything goes in science. Popper disagreed sharply, warning that without standards of criticism, science would collapse into chaos. Yet even his opponents testified to his lasting influence. He had forced them to define their positions in relation to his. At the moral core of Popper's philosophy lay his belief in intellectual honesty. To admit that we might be wrong was, for him, not a weakness, but a strength. It was the condition of all learning. This principle extended to all areas of life, from science to politics to personal ethics. A person who refused to question their own beliefs closed themselves off from reality and from growth. A society that silenced criticism condemned itself to stagnation or tyranny. Freedom of thought, therefore, was not merely a political right, it was the lifeblood of reason itself. Popper warned repeatedly that the greatest enemy of knowledge was not ignorance, but arrogance, the illusion of knowing. Dogmatic systems, whether religious, ideological, or scientific, all shared this flaw. They replaced curiosity with certainty, and inquiry with obedience. The only defense against this danger was the continuous exercise of critical thinking, sustained by institutions that protected it. In this sense, Popper's philosophy was a call to moral vigilance as much as intellectual discipline. Popper's confrontation with totalitarianism was not merely political, but philosophical at its core. He saw the roots of tyranny not only in institutions or leaders, but in ideas, specifically in the intellectual temptation to believe that history or reason itself could justify absolute power. His monumental work, The Open Society and Its Enemies, was written during the darkest years of World War II, while fascism and communism both claimed to represent the inevitable course of history. Popper considered these ideologies to be the products of historicism, the belief that history unfolds according to discoverable laws and that the philosopher or political leader can know these laws in advance. From Plato's ideal state to Hegel's dialectical idealism and Marx's class struggle, he traced a continuous thread of thought, the dream of total knowledge leading to total control. In Popper's eyes, Plato was the first and perhaps the most dangerous architect of the closed society. Though revered as the father of philosophy, Plato's Republic depicted a rigid, hierarchical order governed by philosopher kings who claimed privileged access to truth. Popper read this as a blueprint for intellectual tyranny, where dissent was crushed in the name of justice.
He argued that Plato's insistence on eternal, immutable ideals led him to reject the variability of human experience and the uncertainty that comes with freedom. Instead of embracing the open-ended search for truth, Plato sought to freeze society into a perfect form. For Popper, this was the beginning of the totalitarian impulse, the urge to replace fallible human inquiry with divine or rational certainty. He extended this critique to Hegel and Marx, whom he accused of transforming philosophy into prophecy. Hegel's dialectical idealism, in Popper's view, sanctified the state as the embodiment of reason, paving the way for authoritarian worship of political power. Marx, meanwhile, replaced metaphysical destiny with historical materialism, claiming to have discovered the laws of social evolution. Though Popper admired Marx's moral passion for justice, he condemned the epistemological arrogance of believing that history had an inevitable direction. Once revolutionaries see themselves as agents of destiny rather than participants in dialogue, violence becomes not only permissible, but necessary. In this way, Popper argued that the philosophical dream of total knowledge culminates in totalitarianism. Against this, Popper offered his vision of the open society, a social order built not on dogma, but on criticism, not on destiny, but on decision. The open society acknowledges that humans are fallible, that institutions are imperfect, and that progress depends on our ability to detect and correct errors. It is sustained by democratic institutions, free speech, and the rule of law, not because these are perfect systems, but because they allow for peaceful correction of mistakes. The closed society seeks to control history. The open society seeks to learn from it. The difference, for Popper, was nothing less than the difference between slavery and freedom, between myth and reason.
This view made Popper one of the most eloquent defenders of liberal democracy in the 20th century. But his defense was not sentimental or ideological. He did not claim that democracy produced better outcomes because voters were always wise, or that the will of the majority was inherently virtuous. Instead, his argument was profoundly methodological. Democracy is valuable because it provides the best framework for the peaceful removal of bad governments without bloodshed. Just as scientific theories are tested and discarded when proven false, governments should be subject to criticism and replacement when they fail. This was what Popper called piecemeal social engineering, an experimental, incremental approach to reform that avoids the catastrophes of utopian revolution. Piecemeal social engineering was the practical expression of his philosophy of fallibilism. Instead of attempting to redesign society according to abstract ideals of perfection, we should focus on identifying concrete problems, poverty, injustice, ignorance, and testing solutions within limited contexts. Each reform, like a scientific hypothesis, must be treated as provisional, open to criticism, and reversible if it fails. This attitude required humility from both leaders and citizens, a recognition that good intentions are not enough. For Popper, the road to tyranny was paved by utopian visions that refused to admit their own fallibility. He was especially concerned with the psychological appeal of totalitarianism. Humans crave certainty and belonging, and the open society, with its constant questioning and change, can feel disorienting. Authoritarian ideologies exploit this discomfort by offering simple answers and collective purpose. But Popper warned that this comfort comes at the price of intellectual freedom. He described the closed society as a return to the tribal mentality of early human groups, where tradition and authority replaced critical thought. The open society, in contrast, demanded maturity, the courage to live without ultimate certainty and to accept responsibility for our own choices.
This moral courage, Popper believed, was the foundation of all progress. It was the courage of Socrates who questioned the wisdom of Athens and paid with his life. It was the courage of Galileo who defied the Church's dogma in defense of reason. And it was the courage of ordinary citizens who speak truth to power. For Popper, these figures were not isolated heroes, but symbols of a collective tradition, the tradition of critical rationalism, the spiritual backbone of civilization. Yet Popper was not naive about the fragility of that tradition. He warned that the open society is always under threat from fanaticism, from cynicism, and from intellectual complacency. The defense of the open society, therefore, is an unending task. It requires not only laws and institutions, but also a moral culture of self-criticism. Democracy, he said, is not a state of rest, but a constant process of correction. Popper also recognized that freedom without responsibility could lead to chaos. He was not an anarchist. He saw institutions, especially those that encourage accountability, as essential safeguards against both tyranny and disorder. But institutions alone were not enough. They had to be animated by a spirit of critical inquiry. A constitution, however well designed, cannot protect freedom if citizens cease to think for themselves. Thus, education became for Popper a central concern. He believed that the purpose of education was not to transmit knowledge, but to teach the art of criticism, to train individuals to question, to test, to imagine alternatives. He feared systems of education that prized conformity over creativity, memorization over understanding. Such systems produced obedient workers, but not free thinkers. For the open society to survive, schools had to cultivate independence of mind, respect for evidence, and a willingness to challenge authority. This, he believed, was the highest moral duty of teachers, to prepare the next generation not to believe what they are told, but to think for themselves. In the broader philosophical landscape, Popper's moral philosophy stood apart from both utilitarianism and relativism. He rejected the utilitarian idea that morality could be reduced to the calculation of pleasure and pain, arguing that such metrics ignored the deeper value of freedom and dignity. At the same time, he opposed moral relativism, which denied objective standards altogether. His position was pragmatic yet principled. Moral values, like scientific theories, could be criticized and improved, even if never made perfect. The test of a moral principle was not whether it was eternal, but whether it reduced suffering and injustice in practice.
This approach reflected his lifelong opposition to perfectionism. Every attempt to create heaven on earth, he warned, ended by creating hell. The pursuit of utopia demanded the sacrifice of individuals to collective goals, the suppression of dissent, and the justification of cruelty in the name of purity. By contrast, the modest task of reducing suffering, what he called the negative approach to politics, was both achievable and humane. The goal was not to perfect humanity, but to protect it from its own worst impulses. This humility, paradoxically, was the mark of true greatness in political thought. Popper's vision of progress was therefore evolutionary, not revolutionary. He believed that history had no predetermined direction, but that human creativity and critical reason could make it better. Each generation inherited not a destiny, but a challenge to preserve freedom, to expand knowledge, to correct errors. Progress was not guaranteed, it depended on our willingness to confront problems rather than flee from them. In this sense, optimism itself became a moral choice. In his later years, Popper turned increasingly toward a grand synthesis of knowledge, evolution, and metaphysics, a vision that stretched beyond the philosophy of science into an understanding of the universe itself as a process of discovery and creativity. He had always resisted the narrow empiricism of those who believed that science could only describe facts. For him, science was an adventure of the human spirit, a bold and imaginative quest to understand an open and unpredictable reality. The same logic of conjecture and refutation that governed the growth of knowledge, he came to believe, governed the evolution of life itself. Popper began to describe knowledge as a natural extension of biological adaptation. Every organism, from the simplest microbe to the human mind, survives by forming expectations about its environment and testing them against experience. When these expectations fail, the organism adjusts its behavior or perishes. This process mirrors the structure of scientific inquiry. Hypotheses are tested, failures are eliminated, and successful adaptations survive. Knowledge, in this view, is not a mirror of reality, but an instrument for survival. It evolves through trial and error, guided by problems that emerge from the struggle to live. This evolutionary epistemology provided Popper with a unifying framework that connected biology, psychology, and science. He saw the growth of knowledge as a continuous process that began with the simplest forms of life and reached its highest expression in human reason. The human mind, with its ability to create abstract theories and test them, was nature's most advanced problem-solving device. Yet even our most refined ideas remained fallible, for the logic of trial and error knows no final stage. There are no ultimate solutions, only better ones. The universe, in this sense, is a place of perpetual experimentation. Popper's realism deepened through this evolutionary perspective. He insisted that objective reality exists independently of our perceptions and theories. The very success of science, he argued, presupposes that there is something real out there that resists our expectations. If all knowledge were merely a social construct or linguistic convention, then the stubborn fact of refutation, the way reality pushes back against falsehood, would be inexplicable. He often said that the discovery of error is the discovery of reality. Every failed prediction is a meeting point between thought and the world. To deny this was, for him, to collapse into intellectual nihilism. This stance put him at odds with postmodernism, which was gaining influence in the decades after World War II. Many postmodern thinkers questioned the very notion of objective truth, arguing that knowledge is always shaped by power, language, or culture. Popper rejected this skepticism as self-defeating. If all truth is relative, he asked, then the claim that all truth is relative must also be relative and therefore meaningless. He did not deny that culture and language influence thought, but he maintained that critical discussion allows us to transcend our biases. Objectivity for Popper was not an individual trait, but a social achievement, a product of dialogue, argument, and the willingness to expose one's ideas to refutation. He described this process as a kind of collective evolution of knowledge. Each theory is a tentative solution to a problem. Criticism and testing expose its weaknesses. New theories arise to replace it. This endless cycle mirrors the natural selection of ideas. Just as life adapts to the environment, thought adapts to the structure of reality. Popper's optimism lay in his belief that through this process, humanity could approach truth ever more closely, even if never fully attaining it. Truth was like the horizon, always beyond reach, yet always guiding our movement.
In Objective Knowledge, 1972, Popper articulated his mature vision of the three worlds and their interaction. World 1, the physical world, exists independently of us. The realm of objective knowledge consists of the contents of thought, scientific theories, mathematical proofs, works of art, and cultural traditions. Once created, World 3 objects have an autonomy that allows them to interact with us in unforeseen ways. They become part of the environment in which minds evolve. A scientific paper or philosophical argument, once written, can influence future generations, provoke new ideas, and even reshape the world of matter through technology and action. This triadic ontology gave Popper's philosophy an almost cosmic scope. It explained how mind and matter could interact without collapsing into either physicalism or idealism. Knowledge, he said,
begins as a product of the mind, but becomes an independent force once expressed in language or symbols. The interaction between these worlds drives the evolution of both thought and society. A new idea in World 3 can alter subjective consciousness, World 2, which in turn can transform physical reality, World 1. In this way, human creativity participates in the ongoing evolution of the cosmos. Popper's view of metaphysics was equally open and dynamic. He rejected the positivist claim that metaphysical statements are meaningless. Instead, he saw metaphysics as the speculative frontier of reason, a source of hypotheses and guiding ideas that might one day become testable. Many great scientific revolutions, he observed, began as metaphysical conjectures. Atomism, for instance, was once pure speculation. Today, it is a foundation of physics. Thus, metaphysics was not the enemy of science, but its imaginative partner. What mattered was not whether a statement was metaphysical, but whether it could lead to fruitful criticism and discovery. In this sense, Popper's philosophy of science became a philosophy of creativity. He saw the universe as an unfolding drama of problem-solving, where every solution gives rise to new mysteries. The human mind, as part of this cosmic process, is both participant and observer, endlessly inventing explanations and confronting their limits. Popper often expressed admiration for the boldness of science, the courage to make claims that risk refutation. For him, this courage was not only intellectual, but moral. It required integrity to face error, patience to test ideas rigorously, and humility to accept defeat. These virtues defined the ethos of rational inquiry. Yet Popper also acknowledged the limits of reason. He knew that our capacity for knowledge, however great, would always remain finite. There would always be aspects of reality beyond our comprehension. But he regarded these limits not as barriers, but as invitations to continue the quest. To know that we do not know is, in itself, a form of knowledge. The recognition of ignorance is the first step towards discovery. In this spirit, Popper often quoted Socrates, whose wisdom lay in admitting his own ignorance. The task of philosophy was not to remove uncertainty, but to live fruitfully within it. His cosmological reflections led him to consider the ultimate question of whether the universe itself might be evolving toward greater complexity and understanding. He speculated that reality might not be a fixed structure, but a creative process, an open universe in which new possibilities continually emerge. This idea echoed his lifelong opposition to determinism. Just as human history is not predetermined, neither is the cosmos. The future, he argued, is not something that simply happens to us. It is something we help to create through our actions and ideas. In the face of this openness, Popper rejected both pessimism and utopianism. Pessimism paralyzes, utopianism destroys. The right attitude, he said, is critical optimism, a faith in progress tempered by awareness of error. Critical optimism does not expect perfection, but it believes that improvement is possible through reasoned effort. Every problem, no matter how great, contains the seeds of its own solution if we are willing to search for it. This belief in the improvability of human conditions formed the ethical heart of his philosophy. Popper's reflections on knowledge and evolution also led him to engage with quantum mechanics and cosmology. Though not a physicist himself, he maintained an interest in the philosophical implications of modern physics. He rejected the subjectivist interpretations of quantum theory, such as those of the Copenhagen school, which seemed to make reality dependent on observation. Popper remained a realist. He insisted that the world exists independently of our measurements. He sought interpretations of quantum phenomena that preserve the objectivity of nature. This stance reflected his deeper conviction that science must describe a reality that does not depend on human perception.
Toward the end of his life, Popper became increasingly concerned with the moral and existential implications of his ideas. The open universe, he believed, imposes both freedom and responsibility. If the future is not determined, then our choices truly matter. Each decision contributes to the unfolding of reality. The moral life, therefore, is inseparable from the intellectual life. To act responsibly is to act with awareness of our fallibility, to seek solutions rather than impose them, and to respect the freedom of others to criticize and improve upon our actions. He saw humanity as a self-correcting species, capable of learning from its mistakes, but never free from the temptation of dogma. The challenge of civilization was to sustain the fragile culture of criticism against the forces of conformity and fear. Even as he grew older, Popper retained a profound faith in reason, not as a cold instrument of calculation, but as a living tradition of dialogue and discovery. "I may be wrong," he once said, "and you may be right, and by an effort we may get nearer to the truth." In this single sentence lay the moral essence of his entire philosophy. Karl Popper's legacy extends far beyond the realm of academic philosophy. His ideas reshaped how science, politics, and even culture understand the pursuit of truth. While his theories were forged in the crucible of the 20th century, an age of war, ideology, and revolutionary science, their resonance only deepens with time. To understand his enduring influence, one must trace how his central ideas, falsifiability, critical rationalism, and the open society, transformed into living principles woven into the very fabric of modern thought. In the philosophy of science, Popper's impact is profound and permanent. Before him, many philosophers sought to ground science in verification, an ideal of certainty rooted in the accumulation of positive evidence. Popper overturned that model entirely, arguing that science does not confirm theories, but tests them to destruction. A good theory is not one that explains everything, but one that could, in principle, be proven wrong. This redefinition changed the way both scientists and philosophers understood their work. Einstein's relativity was not great because it fit existing data, but because it risked failure. It exposed itself to potential falsification through precise predictions. This courage to face disproof became the mark of scientific integrity. In practical terms, Popper's falsificationism gave science a new ethical compass. It discouraged the cult of authority and the arrogance of certainty. A true scientist, he said, must treat every cherished theory as a provisional hypothesis. Even the most beautiful model must battle before a stubborn fact. This attitude inspired generations of thinkers, from theoretical physicists to evolutionary biologists, to see their work not as a march towards certainty, but as a disciplined dance with error. The strength of science lies not in what it proves, but in what it can disprove. Yet Popper's philosophy did not stop at the laboratory door. He saw in the scientific method a model for all rational human activity. If falsification is the essence of science, then criticism is the essence of freedom. An open society functions by the same principle that guides a good experiment. It allows hypotheses, political, moral, or social, to be tested against experience and argument. Dictatorships, by contrast, behave like pseudoscience. They protect their doctrines from criticism, suppress dissent, and treat failures as proof of the doctrine's strength. Popper's insight was to see that truth and liberty share the same logic. Both depend on the right to be wrong. In The Open Society and Its Enemies, he drew a sweeping historical line from Plato to Marx, identifying in their utopian schemes the seeds of totalitarianism. What made these systems dangerous was not merely their content, but their method, their belief that history obeys a knowable, inevitable law. This historicism transforms politics into prophecy and dissent into heresy. Once people believe they possess the key to destiny, they will sacrifice liberty in the name of necessity. Against this, Popper championed a modest, piecemeal approach. Improve what is bad, test what is proposed, and never pretend that perfection is attainable. Human progress is not the unfolding of fate, but the slow, uncertain achievement of critical minds. This vision resonated deeply in the post-world world. It inspired liberal democracies to value open debate, transparency, and reform over dogma and revolution. Leaders, scholars, and intellectuals drew on Popper's ideas to defend pluralism and tolerance in an age of ideological extremism.
His philosophy provided not only a theory of science, but a moral architecture for civilization itself. To live by reason is to accept the provisional nature of truth, to value criticism over conformity, and to treat disagreement as a source of strength rather than division.
Popper's influence also extended into fields he never directly addressed. In computer science, his model of conjecture and refutation anticipates the logic of machine learning, where algorithms improve by iterative testing and correction. In evolutionary biology, his concept of knowledge as adaptation foreshadows modern understandings of self-organizing systems and genetic algorithms. Even in psychology, his rejection of Freudian pseudoscience laid the groundwork for a more empirical, testable approach to the human mind. Popper's reach was not limited to what he wrote, but to the method he embodied, a restless curiosity that welcomes contradiction as the engine of progress. His debates with Thomas Kuhn and Emre Lakatos further illustrate how Popper's ideas evolved through criticism. Kuhn's notion of paradigm shifts challenged Popper's continuous model of science by suggesting that progress often involves revolutions rather than steady refutation. Popper responded by emphasizing that even revolutions are guided by critical testing. Paradigms may change, but the spirit of falsifiability endures. Lakatos, meanwhile, developed Popper's insights into the concept of research programs, showing that scientific theories evolve as coherent systems of ideas rather than isolated hypotheses. Popper welcomed these refinements as signs of the vitality of criticism. He never demanded disciples, only interlocutors, willing to test his ideas against reality. In his later reflections, Popper also became a defender of what he called World 3, the realm of objective knowledge. He argued that once ideas are expressed, they gain a life of their own, independent of their creators. Mathematical proofs, scientific theories, philosophical systems, all exist in this autonomous world of content, interacting with human minds and with one another. This view gave intellectual life a new dignity. Our thoughts are not ephemeral shadows, but participants in a grand, evolving conversation that transcends generations. Each mind contributes to a reality larger than itself, a world built not of matter, but of meaning. Popper's humility before this intellectual universe was striking. He often described himself as a mere searcher, someone who preferred questions to answers. Even his opponents admired the moral intensity of his commitment to rational discourse. He believed that truth, though elusive, was worth pursuing endlessly, and that every sincere attempt to approach it enables the human spirit. His writings breathe a rare optimism, a faith not in progress as destiny, but in progress as choice. We are fallible, but not doomed to ignorance, finite, but capable of infinite improvement. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Popper's legacy is his reconciliation of reason and humility. He showed that to doubt is not to despair, but to participate in the most human of all adventures, the search for understanding. He restored to philosophy a sense of moral purpose, linking epistemology to ethics and science to freedom. Knowledge for Popper is not a possession, but a responsibility, a candle we hold together against the darkness. Popper's influence on contemporary epistemology is both subtle and pervasive, shaping not only how knowledge is defined, but also how it is pursued and defended in an age dominated by information, ideology, and technological power. He reoriented the philosophical landscape by rejecting the ancient ideal of episteme, certain unchanging knowledge, and replacing it with a dynamic, self-correcting vision of understanding. Knowledge, for Popper, was not a mirror of reality, but a continual struggle between conjecture and refutation, an endless process of refinement through error. This epistemological humility became the foundation of what he called critical rationalism, a philosophy that reconciles reason with fallibility, logic with creativity, and truth with uncertainty.
His defense of objective truth was not naive realism, but a moral stance. To claim that there are no objective truths, Popper warned, is to abandon the possibility of justice, progress, or understanding. If truth is merely a social construct, then tyranny can justify itself as easily as reason. But if truth exists, however elusive, then criticism has meaning and reform becomes possible. Popper's epistemology thus carries a quiet ethical power. It anchors freedom in the recognition that truth transcends authority. Facts are not decided by consensus or decree. They survive only by surviving scrutiny. In the political sphere, this idea transformed into one of the most profound defenses of liberal democracy ever articulated. For Popper, the moral superiority of democracy lay not in the wisdom of the majority, but in the system's capacity for self-correction. A democracy, like a good scientific theory, can fail, admit its mistakes, and change course without bloodshed. Totalitarian regimes, by contrast, operate on the assumption of infallibility. They interpret criticism as treason, dissent as error, and error as sin. Such systems resemble pseudo-scientific ideologies. They are structured to prevent falsification. Popper saw in this not only political danger, but an epistemological flaw, a confusion of certainty with truth, of stability with justice. The open society is, in essence, the political embodiment of critical rationalism. It recognizes that no government, ideology, or tradition has a monopoly on wisdom. Institutions must therefore be designed not to enshrine truth, but to make error visible and correctable. This is why Popper placed such emphasis on free speech, independent media, transparent governance, and the rule of law. These are not luxuries, but mechanisms of intellectual survival, social forms of falsifiability. When criticism dies, tyranny begins. When debate is silenced, progress ends. In education, Popper's philosophy inspired a vision of learning as exploration rather than indoctrination. To teach critically is not to transmit dogma, but to train minds to question assumptions, test hypotheses, and recognize their own fallibility. Knowledge is not a finished structure handed down by authority, but a living process that each generation must rebuild. Popper's educational philosophy thus aligns with a broader vision of human freedom: liberation through inquiry. The goal is not certainty, but competence in dealing with uncertainty, the ability to navigate complexity without collapsing into cynicism or fanaticism. His thought also influenced moral philosophy in unexpected ways. Popper rejected moral absolutism and moral relativism alike, proposing instead an ethics of fallibility. We cannot know what is perfectly good, but we can recognize and alleviate suffering. He famously suggested that moral progress lies not in pursuing utopias, but in reducing concrete evils. This pragmatic, compassionate realism transformed ethics from a quest for perfection into a discipline of improvement. By identifying moral problems as falsifiable, testable through their consequences, he extended the logic of science into the sphere of value, without reducing morality to mere calculation. The question is not, what is the good society, but what can we do to make society less cruel, less unjust, less closed? In this ethical modesty lies Popper's deepest humanism. He understood that ideals become dangerous when they harden into certainties. The dream of perfection, once institutionalized, breeds oppression. To save humanity, we must first save the freedom to criticize our own ideals. Popper thus transformed skepticism into a form of moral courage. He taught that doubt is not weakness, but the conscience of reason, the voice that prevents conviction from becoming cruelty.
The influence of this moral rationalism can be felt in countless modern movements: human rights advocacy, scientific transparency, environmental reform, digital ethics, and democratic resilience. Each of these embodies in its own domain the Popperian spirit of correction through openness. When societies establish mechanisms for whistleblowing, free investigation, or judicial review, they are enacting Popper's vision in institutional form. When citizens demand accountability, they are practicing the same logic that governs the testing of hypotheses. The laboratory and the parliament, in Popper's thought, are not opposites, but parallel arenas of truth-seeking. Popper also foresaw a world increasingly dominated by technology and data, and he would likely have seen the digital age as both an opportunity and a peril. The Internet, in principle, fulfills his dream of an open forum for global criticism, yet it also exposes humanity's weakness for confirmation rather than refutation. He would have warned that the freedom to publish must be balanced by the discipline to think critically. In a world overflowing with information, falsifiability becomes not just a scientific criterion, but a civic virtue. To be rational in the digital era means to test, to question, and to doubt the seductive clarity of echo chambers.
Popper's legacy in epistemology, politics, and ethics thus converges on a single principle: progress without perfection. He offered humanity a way to advance without illusions, to improve without idolizing our methods or our leaders. He replaced the dream of final truth with the hope of endless learning, the fantasy of utopia with the discipline of reform. His philosophy stands as both shield and compass, a protection against fanaticism and a guide toward intellectual maturity. In an age of dogmatic polarization and technological overreach, Popper's voice reminds us that civilization itself depends on the courage to say, "I might be wrong." After Popper's death, his ideas did not fade into the archives of philosophy, but instead became the intellectual DNA of many modern disciplines. His concepts, falsifiability, open society, and critical rationalism, migrated far beyond the philosophical journals of mid-century Europe and found new life in the debates that define the modern world: science versus pseudoscience, democracy versus populism, truth versus ideology, and reason versus nihilism. Popper's influence became so pervasive that it sometimes disappeared from sight, absorbed into the very framework of rational discourse, as if his method had become the grammar of modern thought itself. Yet his intellectual heirs did not always agree on how to interpret him. Some saw him as the last great defender of Enlightenment rationality, others as the first philosopher of postmodern uncertainty. In truth, Popper stood between these worlds. He accepted the Enlightenment ideal of reason and truth, but stripped it of its arrogance. He accepted the postmodern critique of certainty, but refused to surrender to relativism. In that balance lies his enduring significance. He preserved rationality by making it self-critical, and he preserved skepticism by giving it moral purpose. Among his most prominent philosophical descendants was Imre Lakatos, who sought to refine Popper's falsificationism into a more nuanced model of scientific evolution. Lakatos agreed that science advances through the testing of theories, but observed that scientists rarely abandon a theory after one failed prediction. Instead, they adjust auxiliary assumptions, modify experimental interpretations, and defend the hard core of their research program. This process, he argued, is not irrational. It is part of how progress actually occurs. Lakatos's methodology of scientific research programs thus preserved Popper's spirit while acknowledging the complexity of scientific practice. Popper welcomed this as a sign that his method could evolve. For him, even criticism of his theory of criticism was a victory for critical rationalism itself. Thomas Kuhn, meanwhile, represented the more radical challenge. His idea of paradigm shifts suggested that scientific revolutions are not merely logical transitions, but sociological transformations, changes in worldview that cannot be measured by a neutral standard. Popper resisted this relativist interpretation. He argued that even if science moves through revolutions, what drives those revolutions is still the confrontation between theory and evidence, between bold conjecture and brutal refutation. Kuhn had shown that science is a human enterprise. Popper reminded him that it is also a rational one. This dialogue between Popper and Kuhn still animates contemporary debates about the nature of scientific progress, whether it is cumulative, revolutionary, or dialectical. In the broader intellectual landscape, Popper's thought became a bulwark against postmodern nihilism. As thinkers like Foucault, Derrida, and Lyotard began to deconstruct the notion of objective truth, Popper's philosophy offered a quiet but firm resistance. He did not deny that knowledge is historically conditioned or linguistically mediated, but he insisted that these facts do not make truth subjective. To say that all truth is relative, he argued, is to make an absolute claim, a self-contradiction that destroys the very language of reason. Popper's realism is humble but firm. Reality exists independently of us, and our ideas succeed or fail according to how well they survive its tests. This realism anchors his ethics, his politics, and his science. Modern defenders of reason, such as Steven Pinker, David Deutsch, and Helena Cronin, draw directly from Popper's lineage. Deutsch, in particular, in The Fabric of Reality and The Beginning of Infinity, extends Popper's philosophy into the cosmological and computational realms. He sees knowledge as the universal driver of progress and error correction as the cosmic principle of creation. Where Popper saw conjecture and refutation, Deutsch sees explanation and improvement, two expressions of the same rational process. Through this lineage, Popper's thought evolves into a kind of cosmic optimism, the belief that problems are inevitable but solvable, that ignorance is infinite but conquerable through understanding.
In the social sciences, Popper's influence continues to serve as a safeguard against pseudo-scientific ideologies. Economics, political theory, and sociology have all wrestled with his critique of historicism, the belief that history follows inevitable laws. Popper's warning against the prophecies of destiny remains strikingly relevant in the age of algorithmic prediction and data determinism. Even as artificial intelligence models claim to foresee human behavior, Popper's lesson endures. No system can predict the future of knowledge itself. The human capacity to learn, criticize, and innovate always escapes the bounds of computation. We are, by our nature, unpredictable to any formula that does not include the possibility of freedom. His ideas also provide a philosophical defense against the rise of authoritarian populism. Popper understood that every closed ideology, whether ancient or modern, thrives by pretending to possess a higher knowledge of history or morality. Populist movements that reject expertise and vilify criticism are, in his terms, new forms of tribalism, echoes of the closed societies of the past. Their power lies in the seduction of certainty, in the emotional comfort of belonging to a moral absolute. Against this, Popper offers a culture of reason grounded in humility, the willingness to say, "I might be wrong, and so might you, but together we can test and learn." This spirit, fragile yet resilient, is the essence of liberal civilization. Even in technology and artificial intelligence, Popper's thought finds new applications. His model of learning, conjecture, and refutation mirrors the logic of algorithmic optimization. Machine learning systems propose hypotheses, test them against data, and adjust when falsified.
Yet Popper would remind us that the machine's process is blind. Only humans bring purpose and moral direction to the search for truth. He would warn that knowledge divorced from values becomes power without conscience, and that the greatest test of the open society in the digital age is not access to information, but the cultivation of wisdom. Popper's intellectual descendants also include those who use his methods to defend pluralism in philosophy itself. Where once thinkers sought final systems of truth, Popper's legacy is the recognition that philosophy must remain open-ended, a conversation rather than a creed. His method encourages diversity of perspective because truth itself requires multiple attempts, each partial, each fallible. In this way, Popper reconciles individual freedom with collective progress. Each person contributes a piece to the greater mosaic of understanding. In recent decades, scholars have also begun reinterpreting Popper through the lens of systems theory, complexity science, and evolutionary epistemology. They see his work as an early precursor to ideas that now dominate interdisciplinary research: self-organizing systems, feedback loops, and adaptive networks. Popper's principle of falsification appears again in ecology, economics, and cybernetics as the logic of survival. Systems endure not because they are perfect, but because they learn from failure. His philosophy, originally framed around science and politics, thus becomes a universal grammar of adaptation. To survive is to criticize. To persist is to improve. Even spiritually, Popper's influence lingers. Though an atheist, he embodied a reverence for truth that borders on the sacred. He replaced faith in revelation with faith in reason's infinite journey. In a world increasingly divided between fanaticism and nihilism, his voice stands as a third path, a philosophy of hopeful realism. It invites humanity to face uncertainty not with fear but with curiosity, to treat doubt not as a wound but as a window. Popper's concept of the open universe represents one of the most visionary aspects of his thought, a synthesis of metaphysics, epistemology, and moral philosophy into a single worldview. For him, the universe is not a closed, deterministic mechanism, but an unfolding process of possibilities. Every act of discovery, every emergence of novelty, whether biological, cultural, or intellectual, represents the universe becoming aware of itself in new ways. He saw reality as dynamic, layered, and creative. Each level of existence, physical, biological, psychological, social, builds upon the previous one while introducing genuine unpredictability. This openness, he argued, is not an illusion born of ignorance, but a structural feature of existence itself. In rejecting determinism, Popper confronted one of the most persistent myths in philosophy and science, the belief that everything, if only we had perfect knowledge, could be predicted. From Laplace's demon to modern algorithmic models, determinism has seduced minds with its promise of order and control. But Popper saw in this vision a profound misunderstanding of both nature and knowledge. Even if we could know all the physical laws and initial conditions, we could never predict the growth of knowledge, because the future content of knowledge depends on ideas not yet conceived. No machine, no intellect, even a god could foresee the discoveries that free beings will one day create. This was his boldest claim, that indeterminacy is not ignorance, but freedom.
Popper's open universe is thus a universe of creativity. New ideas, mutations, inventions, and interpretations are not accidents, they are the very engine of reality. He described this process in evolutionary terms: variation, and selection, but he gave it a philosophical depth that Darwin himself never attempted. In every domain, progress occurs through trial and error, through the birth and death of forms, whether they are organisms, theories, or moral systems. Falsifiability is not merely a method of science, it is the rhythm of existence. To be is to be capable of error. To grow is to endure correction. The cosmos, in Popper's metaphysical vision, is a vast experiment in learning. This open universe perspective had profound ethical implications. If reality itself is creative and indeterminate, then human freedom is not an illusion, but a reflection of cosmic order. Our choices matter precisely because the universe is not predetermined. We contribute to its unfolding by the ideas we propose and the actions we test. Each moral decision, each act of compassion or cruelty, becomes a thread woven into the open fabric of being. Popper thus linked epistemology to responsibility. To think is to act upon reality. To criticize is to create. Every human life, no matter how humble, participates in the self-correcting evolution of the world. In this view, knowledge is not the possession of truths, but the construction of ever better approximations. Every generation inherits theories, traditions, and institutions, its tentative truths, and must test them anew against the challenges of experience. What survives is not certainty, but resilience. Theories that endure are those that remain open to falsification. Societies that endure are those that remain open to reform. The closed system, whether intellectual or political, withers because it cannot learn. Popper's vision of the open universe is therefore also a philosophy of hope. As long as criticism is possible, catastrophe is not final. As long as we can learn, decline is not destiny. This open view of reality connects Popper to the great traditions of philosophical optimism, from Heraclitus's flux to Bergson's élan vital, from Whitehead's process philosophy to Dewey's pragmatism. Yet Popper's distinct contribution was to give this optimism a rational foundation. He did not appeal to mystical harmony or divine purpose, but to the logic of discovery itself. We know that new truths will emerge because the structure of knowledge guarantees their possibility. The universe, by its very openness, demands exploration. To exist in such a world is to live in a perpetual frontier, where every solved problem births 10 new questions. In this sense, Popper's metaphysics becomes a kind of secular faith, a belief in progress grounded not in inevitability, but in fallibility. As science advanced into quantum mechanics and complexity theory, Popper's philosophy found unexpected validation. Quantum indeterminacy confirmed his intuition that the future is not fixed. Chaos theory revealed how small differences can produce unpredictable outcomes even in deterministic systems. And the study of complex adaptive systems echoed his insight that survival depends on the capacity for error correction. The scientific world had, in a sense, caught up with Popper's metaphysical vision. The world is open, creative, and self-organizing. But Popper went further than most scientists dared. He proposed that objective knowledge, what he called World 3, has an emergent reality of its own, influencing the material world that gave rise to it. Books, theories, mathematical systems, institutions, these are not mere human artifacts, but structures that shape the evolution of consciousness and society. Once a theory exists, it can be tested, criticized, improved, and applied by minds not yet born. Ideas, once expressed, acquire autonomy. This means that human civilization is not just a biological phenomenon, but a new layer of reality in the open universe, a realm of meanings that evolve according to the logic of criticism.
The open society is in this sense the ecological environment of World 3, a space where ideas compete and cooperate freely. This idea of emergent knowledge connects Popper's philosophy to modern information theory and memetics. Just as genes propagate through biological evolution, memes, units of cultural information, evolve through social selection. But while others have treated memes as amoral replicators, Popper's framework introduces a moral dimension. Not all ideas deserve survival. The open society must act as a selective environment that favors truth-seeking, creativity, and compassion over superstition, deception, and cruelty. Thus, ethics becomes an extension of epistemology. Moral progress is cognitive progress applied to life.
In our century, the open universe faces new forms of closure. Digital algorithms shape opinion, political systems harden into populist dogmas, and technological acceleration outpaces reflection. In such a world, Popper's philosophy is more urgent than ever. He reminds us that freedom is not a gift, but a method, a discipline of continual testing and correction. Truth is not a possession, but a process. The open society can survive only if its citizens cultivate the virtues of the open mind: humility, curiosity, and courage. Without these, the world collapses into tribal certainties and digital illusions. Popper's ultimate message, distilled from his entire philosophy, might be this: the fate of the universe depends on our willingness to learn. Every mind that seeks truth participates in the cosmic project of discovery. Every criticism, every experiment, every act of conscience contributes to the universe's unfolding openness. In this vast and uncertain reality, we are not spectators, but co-creators. Our task is not to find the final answer, but to keep the dialogue alive. As long as questions remain, so does hope. Popper's philosophy of reason and morality begins with a profound paradox: that rationality itself depends on recognizing its limits. For him, to be rational is not to be certain, but to accept fallibility as the foundation of truth-seeking. He believed that humility, not dogma, is the core of reason. The truly rational person is not the one who claims to know everything, but the one who is always ready to admit, "I may be wrong and you may be right, and by an effort we may get nearer to the truth." This statement, simple yet radical, defines the moral essence of Popper's thought. Reason, he argued, is a moral attitude before it is a method. In the intellectual tradition of the Enlightenment, reason had often been treated as a tool for mastering nature and controlling human affairs. Popper turned this view inside out. He saw reason as a way of cooperating with others, of sharing a world in which ideas compete without people destroying each other. The moral heart of rationality is respect, respect for evidence, for argument, and for the autonomy of other minds. Every act of rational dialogue, for Popper, is an act of peace, a refusal to resort to force, a recognition that persuasion is nobler than coercion. Where tyranny silences criticism, reason keeps it alive. Thus, the open society is not just a political structure, but an ethical commitment to the dignity of reason itself. Popper's moral interpretation of rationality leads naturally to his critique of intellectual arrogance. He called it intellectual sin to believe one's theory immune to criticism. Such arrogance, he warned, transforms science into superstition and philosophy into propaganda. The moment a thinker identifies their idea with truth itself, they cease to think. They become a priest of dogma. Popper's insistence on fallibility is therefore both epistemological and ethical. It disciplines the mind against pride and fanaticism. It demands that we treat truth not as possession, but as pursuit, not as a trophy, but as a horizon that moves as we move. In this sense, Popper's moral vision is deeply Socratic. He revives the ancient ideal that wisdom begins with the confession of ignorance, but he modernizes it by connecting it to the scientific method. We learn not by proving ourselves right, but by finding out where we are wrong. Error is not failure, but opportunity. To make a mistake is to create the conditions for growth. This optimism about error, what Popper sometimes called rational optimism, stands at the center of his humanism. It affirms that progress, both moral and intellectual, depends on our ability to learn from our own fallibility. Popper's moral rationalism also implies a political ethic, the idea that institutions, like individuals, must remain corrigible. Just as scientific theories require falsifiability, so political systems require reformability. No constitution, no ideology, no economic model should ever be treated as final. Once a society begins to treat its principles as sacred, it stops learning and soon begins decaying. That is why Popper defended democracy not as the rule of the majority, but as the system best equipped to correct its own mistakes without bloodshed. For him, the moral superiority of democracy lies not in who rules, but in how errors are handled. A democratic system allows peaceful change. A totalitarian one demands violent revolution. This was not abstract theory for Popper. It was a conclusion drawn from the tragedies of the 20th century. The same moral humility applies, in Popper's eyes, to the realm of science. He regarded the scientific enterprise as a moral community governed by honesty, criticism, and respect for evidence. A scientist who suppresses data, falsifies results, or silences dissent is committing an ethical crime, not just an intellectual one. Truth-seeking is a cooperative venture that requires trust, openness, and integrity. Thus, science becomes a moral model for society, an illustration of how freedom, responsibility, and truth can coexist. It is, as Popper saw it, the most moral of human institutions, precisely because it is built on the recognition of error.
Yet Popper also knew that reason alone could not sustain morality. He did not believe that logic could replace conscience. Rather, he saw moral values, such as honesty, tolerance, and compassion, as preconditions for rational discourse. Without them, reason degenerates into manipulation. In this way, Popper anticipated the later insights of moral philosophers like Habermas and Rawls, who argued that ethics arises from the conditions of dialogue itself. But Popper went further. He saw moral evolution as continuous with intellectual evolution. As our knowledge grows, so must our sense of responsibility. To understand more is to owe more. In his later writings, Popper reflected increasingly on the role of love and empathy in the pursuit of knowledge. He came to see that criticism, though essential, must be guided by goodwill. A critic who delights in humiliation or domination betrays the spirit of rationality. True criticism, he wrote, is an act of friendship. It helps others see what they could not see alone. It liberates, not destroys. This union of reason and compassion is one of Popper's most beautiful insights. It suggests that the highest form of knowledge is not cold detachment, but caring understanding. To know the world truly, we must care for it deeply. Popper's moral rationalism also shaped his view of history. He rejected the deterministic philosophies of Hegel and Marx because they denied moral agency.
To say that history follows iron laws is, in his view, to excuse evil. It transforms suffering into necessity and responsibility into illusion. Popper insisted that history is the result of human actions, not divine or dialectical inevitability. We make history, but we do not make it under conditions of our choosing. And yet, within those constraints, freedom remains real. This is why he described history not as destiny, but as problem-solving. Each generation faces the consequences of past mistakes and must find creative ways to correct them. This method, humble yet effective, mirrors the scientific attitude. In Popper's mind, both ethics and science are forms of moral experimentation, both devoted to minimizing error and suffering. In his later life, Popper became increasingly preoccupied with the metaphysical and existential dimensions of this moral project. He began to see human beings as participants in a cosmic struggle between truth and falsehood, creation and destruction. To live rationally and morally is to align oneself with the forces of creation, with what he sometimes called the third world of objective knowledge, where truth, beauty, and meaning continue to evolve beyond individual lives. Our moral task, then, is to nurture this world, to add to it rather than diminish it. In every act of thought, every deed of kindness, we extend the frontier of the open universe. Popper's influence on 20th and 21st century thought radiates across disciplines, reshaping not only philosophy, but also the foundations of science, political theory, and even technology. His central insight, that knowledge grows through the correction of error, became one of the defining principles of modern epistemology. Yet his impact went far beyond the academy. It redefined how entire societies understood truth, progress, and freedom. From quantum physics to artificial intelligence, from democratic reform to digital ethics, Popper's ideas continued to provide the intellectual scaffolding for our age of uncertainty. In the realm of science, Popper's insistence on falsifiability as the demarcation criterion transformed how researchers understood what counts as scientific. Before Popper, many believed that science advanced through verification, accumulating evidence to confirm hypotheses. Popper overturned this assumption with a single, elegant reversal. No number of confirming instances can prove a theory true, but a single counterexample can show it to be false. This shift was not merely technical, it was philosophical revolution. It restored intellectual honesty to the heart of science. Instead of seeking confirmation, the scientist must seek refutation. Instead of defending ideas, one must expose them to their harshest tests. Science thus became an act of moral courage, the courage to face the possibility of being wrong. This concept deeply influenced the scientific community after World War II. It shaped the methodologies of fields as diverse as evolutionary biology, cosmology, and psychology. Researchers began to design experiments not to prove, but to challenge their theories, cultivating a self-correcting spirit.
Even disciplines like economics and sociology, often accused of being soft sciences, borrowed Popperian principles to strengthen their empirical foundations. Yet Popper himself warned against misunderstanding falsifiability as a mechanical rule. It was not a checklist, but a spirit of inquiry. The heart of science, he reminded his readers, is not the rejection of error alone, but the creative generation of bold, testable ideas. This balance between creativity and criticism became one of Popper's greatest legacies. He often said that the growth of knowledge depends on the interplay of two forces, imaginative conjecture and rigorous refutation. Without imagination, science stagnates. Without criticism, it degenerates into mythology. The true scientist, therefore, must live in the tension between boldness and humility, between invention and doubt.
This dialectic of thought mirrors the moral tension of human life itself, the constant oscillation between hope and limitation, vision and correction. In Popper's view, every act of discovery is a miniature act of liberation, freeing humanity from ignorance while reminding it of its finite grasp. Popper's ideas also anticipated the modern philosophy of complex systems. He recognized that knowledge in the natural and social sciences is inherently provisional because the systems under study are open and adaptive. This insight has proven prophetic in the age of chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics, and ecological science. It also resonates with modern data science and artificial intelligence, where models must be continuously updated in light of new information. A Popperian AI, so to speak, would not seek certainty, but constant self-correction. It would learn by error, not by authority. Indeed, the modern paradigm of machine learning, iteratively testing hypotheses and adjusting based on failures, echoes Popper's epistemology almost perfectly. What Popper theorized about human thought has now become a computational reality. In politics, his impact was equally transformative. Popper's The Open Society and Its Enemies remains one of the most influential critiques of totalitarianism ever written. It inspired thinkers like Isaiah Berlin, Hannah Arendt, and Friedrich Hayek, and later shaped democratic reform movements in Eastern Europe. His defense of the open society offered not just a political structure, but an ethical blueprint. A society must remain open to criticism or risk collapse into tyranny. Even after the Cold War, Popper's warning continues to resonate in the face of populism, authoritarian revival, and digital propaganda. He would argue that the greatest threat to democracy today is not overt dictatorship, but the subtle erosion of critical discourse, the replacement of reasoned debate by emotional manipulation and algorithmic tribalism. Popper's ideas also reshaped philosophy itself. His critical rationalism offered a third way between the two extremes, the dogmatic rationalism of Descartes and the skeptical relativism of Nietzsche. He showed that we can pursue truth without claiming to possess it, that objectivity is a process rather than a state. This insight liberated philosophy from the obsession with certainty and redirected it toward the ethics of inquiry. Thinkers like Imre Lakatos, Paul Feyerabend, and Thomas Kuhn built upon or against his framework, refining and challenging his ideas. Even when they disagreed with him, they did so on his terms, showing how profoundly he had set the agenda for post-war philosophy of science. In the modern era, Popper's influence can even be traced into computer science, economics, and systems theory. Silicon Valley innovators like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have cited Popper's principles as the intellectual foundation for iterative experimentation, fail fast, learn faster. In the world of policy, his emphasis on piecemeal engineering continues to shape evidence-based governance. Instead of grand revolutions, modern democracies now pursue incremental reforms tested through data and feedback, a living embodiment of Popper's philosophy in political practice. Wherever systems are built to learn from failure rather than conceal it, Popper's ghost walks silently in the background. But perhaps his most enduring impact lies in the moral imagination of science. He gave scientists and citizens alike a reason to believe that truth, though never final, is still worth seeking. He replaced despair with discipline, relativism with responsibility. In an age where many have lost faith in objectivity, Popper's voice continues to whisper that fallibility is not weakness, it is our greatest strength. It is the condition that makes freedom, learning, and progress possible.
Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, 1962, appeared at first glance to undermine Popper's entire framework. Kuhn argued that science does not progress by the steady accumulation of falsifiable hypotheses, but by periodic revolutions, radical shifts from one paradigm to another. Within a paradigm, scientists work within a shared worldview that defines what counts as valid questions and acceptable answers. When anomalies accumulate, a crisis erupts, and a new paradigm replaces the old. To Popper, this sounded dangerously close to relativism. If scientific progress depends on social consensus rather than rational testing, then truth risks dissolving into sociology. He accused Kuhn of portraying scientists as slaves of their paradigms, unable to compare theories objectively. Yet Popper's critique missed some of Kuhn's subtlety. Kuhn did not deny that science aims at truth. He simply emphasized the historical and psychological dimensions of how scientists operate. He revealed that scientific communities, like political institutions, have structures of power, inertia, and belief. In doing so, Kuhn made Popper's picture of science more realistic. Science, he showed, is not a disembodied logic machine. It is a human enterprise shaped by culture and history. Popper's defenders later argued that his philosophy could absorb Kuhn's insights without abandoning its core principles. The process of conjecture and refutation still applies, but it now unfolds within shifting historical frameworks. Science is rational not because scientists are perfect, but because their institutions allow correction across generations. Paul Feyerabend, Popper's student and later his most notorious critic, went even further. In Against Method, 1975, Feyerabend declared that there is no single scientific method, that anything goes in the history of discovery. He argued that strict methodological rules like Popper's falsifiability would have prevented many breakthroughs. Galileo, for example, persuaded his contemporaries not through pure logic, but through rhetorical brilliance and imaginative experiments that violated existing norms. Feyerabend saw science as an anarchic, creative activity that thrives on methodological diversity. His attack was as much moral as intellectual. He feared that rationalism could become a new tyranny, suppressing creativity under the pretense of logic. Popper responded sharply. He agreed that creativity and imagination were essential, but maintained that without criticism, they degenerate into chaos. Anything goes, he said, means nothing is learned. To abandon methodological standards is to surrender to irrationalism. For Popper, reason was not a cage, but a compass, flexible enough to allow innovation, but firm enough to prevent self-deception. He recognized that scientists often break rules, but what matters is that their work remains open to public criticism and potential falsification. Science can tolerate madness, but not dogma. The danger is not bold speculation, but the refusal to test one's beliefs. Despite their disputes, Feyerabend and Popper shared an unexpected bond. Both opposed authoritarian thinking. Both wanted to protect the freedom of inquiry against bureaucratic and ideological control. In this sense, Feyerabend's epistemological anarchism can be seen as a wild offspring of Popper's open society, an attempt to extend the spirit of freedom even further, perhaps the space of thought he had created. The postmodern turn in the late 20th century
brought new challenges to Popper's vision of rationality. Thinkers like Michel Foucault, Jean-François Lyotard, and Richard Rorty argued that truth itself is a construct, shaped by power, language, and social context. Popper's idea of objective knowledge seemed to them a remnant of Enlightenment hubris. Yet Popper had already anticipated this critique. He had always insisted that while our access to truth is mediated and fallible, truth itself remains independent of us. To deny objective truth, he argued, is not humility, but nihilism. It is to make criticism meaningless, since there would be no external standard by which to judge error. Popper's realism was not arrogant, it was the minimal condition for dialogue. If nothing is true, then nothing can be questioned. His confrontation with postmodernism also exposed the moral dimension of his philosophy. He accused the postmodernists of confusing tolerance with relativism. To be tolerant, he said, is to permit diverse opinions while still holding some beliefs to be truer than others. To be relativist is to deny that truth matters at all. This confusion, he warned, leads to cultural paralysis, a world where every claim is just another narrative, and no injustice can be condemned. Popper's defense of truth was therefore also a defense of morality. It preserved the idea that reason can expose cruelty, that evidence can reveal lies, and that criticism can challenge power.
In this way, Popper's philosophy survived the postmodern storm by evolving into a form of moral realism. He acknowledged that knowledge is shaped by history, language, and society, but insisted that it can still aim at truth beyond them. Human understanding is situated, but truth is not owned. Each culture, each generation contributes hypotheses to a shared human dialogue about reality. The fact that we can correct one another across time and culture is itself evidence that objective truth exists. For Popper, this intergenerational conversation, the great human project of learning through criticism, is the highest expression of reason and the truest hope of civilization. In the 21st century, Karl Popper's philosophy has found renewed relevance in the domains of technology, artificial intelligence, and digital ethics. The world has changed dramatically since his death in 1994, but the challenges of truth, knowledge, and freedom that he wrestled with have only intensified. Today, algorithms shape public opinion, data replaces dialogue, and machines learn patterns that even their creators cannot fully explain. Yet the deeper these systems penetrate into human life, the more urgently Popper's insights about fallibility, falsifiability, and open criticism speak to our time. Popper's concept of falsifiability fits perfectly into the logic of modern machine learning. At its core, every algorithm is a system of conjectures and refutations. It begins with a hypothesis, a model trained on past data, and then tests itself against new information. When the model fails to predict accurately, it is corrected, refined, or replaced. This is Popper's epistemology in mechanical form, knowledge as an endless process of error elimination. The success of artificial intelligence, therefore, is not proof that machines can know in a human sense, but that Popper was right about how all learning works through cycles of failure and correction. However, the rise of AI also exposes the dangers of abandoning Popper's moral and philosophical framework. Algorithms, though self-correcting in design, lack the ethical consciousness that guides human inquiry. They can optimize for efficiency while ignoring fairness, or reinforce biases hidden in their training data. Popper would have seen in this a new kind of totalitarianism, not political, but computational. It replaces dogma with data, yet remains closed to criticism because its decisions are opaque and self-justifying. A system that cannot explain its own reasoning or allow scrutiny from the outside violates the spirit of the open society. It becomes a digital version of the closed system Popper warned against, a black box immune to falsification. Thus, Popper's principles provide a powerful ethical framework for AI governance. Transparency, accountability, and interpretability are the technological equivalents of falsifiability. An algorithm, like a scientific theory, must expose itself to potential refutation. If its decisions cannot be tested, questioned, or corrected, then it ceases to be rational. It becomes superstition in silicon. In this sense, the philosophy of science must now evolve into a philosophy of technology. We must design systems that embody Popper's moral vision, fallible but corrigible, powerful but open to criticism. The problem extends beyond technology to the structure of digital society itself. The Internet was once hailed as the ultimate realization of the open society, a global space for dialogue, innovation, and the free exchange of ideas. But in practice, it has often turned into its opposite. Popper's nightmare of the closed mind has re-emerged in the form of algorithmic echo chambers, where individuals are trapped in self-reinforcing beliefs. Social media platforms, driven by engagement rather than truth, amplify emotional certainty and suppress critical thought. The result is a paradox, an ocean of information combined with islands of ignorance. In Popperian terms, humanity has built the most connected society in history, and yet the least open. Popper would have argued that the cure lies not in censorship or control, but in cultivating the moral habits of critical rationalism at the individual level. Technology cannot save us from our own intellectual laziness. Freedom of thought is only meaningful if accompanied by the courage to challenge one's own assumptions. An open internet, like an open society, must be maintained through constant self-criticism and debate. The responsibility lies not only with engineers and governments, but with citizens who must learn to think scientifically, not by memorizing facts, but by mastering the art of doubt. In this way, Popper's philosophy becomes a kind of digital humanism. He reminds us that technological progress without moral progress is hollow. The machines may learn faster than we do, but they cannot teach us humility. They cannot teach us that truth is not a product, but a process, not a data set, but a dialogue.
The Popperian worldview, applied to the digital age, demands that we treat knowledge as a public trust, an evolving collaboration between human minds and artificial systems, grounded in transparency and self-correction. This approach also has implications for the politics of information. The rise of disinformation, deepfakes, and algorithmic propaganda has blurred the line between truth and falsehood. Popper would have recognized this as the epistemological crisis of a civilization that has forgotten his central lesson, that truth must be defended by method, not authority. In a world flooded with data, verification becomes the new moral act. Each claim must be treated as a hypothesis to be tested, not a revelation to be believed. Critical rationalism, once confined to the laboratory, must now become a civic virtue, a habit of digital citizenship. His insights even resonate in the field of artificial general intelligence research. If machines ever approach human-like reasoning, their moral alignment will depend on whether they can internalize something akin to Popper's principle of fallibility. An intelligent system that cannot doubt itself is inherently dangerous. A true rational agent,
whether biological or artificial, must possess the ability to question its own premises, to learn from criticism, and to act on uncertainty rather than conviction. In that sense, Popper's philosophy may hold the key to the safe development of AI, not through control, but through the cultivation of self-critical reason. Beyond technology, Popper's thought continues to influence global discussions about knowledge and democracy in the post-truth era. When conspiracy theories thrive, when institutions lose credibility, and when polarization replaces dialogue, the Popperian remedy remains the same: open criticism and the willingness to be wrong. Societies survive only when they can reform without destruction, argue without violence, and doubt without despair. These are not merely political virtues, they are epistemological ones. They define what it means to live rationally in a world that will never give us certainty, but can always offer us improvement. Popper's theory of falsification reaches beyond science. It becomes a model for rational life itself. To live as a falsificationist is to live without the illusion of final truths. It means welcoming criticism, not fearing it. It means viewing every opinion, belief, or institution as a hypothesis, tentative, conditional, open to revision. This attitude, which Popper calls the critical attitude, is the foundation of both intellectual honesty and political freedom. For Popper, the greatest danger to humanity is not ignorance, but dogmatism, the refusal to admit fallibility. Every tyranny begins with an idea that cannot be questioned. Every orthodoxy, no matter how noble, turns destructive when it stops inviting criticism. Thus, the health of a civilization depends on its willingness to be refuted, to test its own values against experience and dissent. Popper's vision of the open society embodies this spirit. He contrasts open societies, where institutions can change and individuals may criticize power, with closed societies, which rest on myths of destiny, tribal unity, or historical necessity. Closed societies, whether ancient theocracies or modern totalitarian regimes, suffocate thought by claiming to know the ultimate truth. They replace argument with authority, progress with preservation. In contrast, an open society thrives on pluralism, fallibility, and reform. It is not perfect, but it is self-correcting. Its strength lies not in achieving utopia, but in continuously avoiding the worst outcomes through critique and adaptation. For Popper, political utopianism is among the gravest threats. He argues that utopian ideologies, by imagining a perfect social order, justify unlimited coercion in pursuit of their goal. To create paradise, they destroy freedom. He sees this in Marxism, in fascism, and even in well-meaning reformers who claim to know what is best for all. Popper calls for piecemeal social engineering instead of utopian planning. Change must come through small, testable reforms, whose consequences can be evaluated and corrected. Society, like science, must proceed by conjecture and refutation, never by prophetic certainty. In this sense, political wisdom is methodological humility. Popper's hostility toward historicism also stems from this principle. Historicism is the belief that history unfolds according to discoverable laws or inevitable patterns. Hegel, Marx, and Spengler are his primary targets. He criticizes them for pretending to predict the course of civilization as though societies evolved like celestial mechanics. To Popper, this is an abuse of reason, a transformation of human freedom into determinism, If history follows necessity, individuals lose responsibility. But if the future is open, human action regains its significance. Freedom is inseparable from uncertainty. That is the moral consequence of Popper's epistemology. Our ignorance is the space within which freedom operates.
The open society, then, is not merely a political framework. It is an ethical posture toward existence. It acknowledges that our values, like our theories, are conjectural. We defend them not because they are eternally true, but because they have survived criticism better than alternatives. Tolerance, equality, and democracy are justified not by metaphysical dogma, but by their resilience against falsification in moral experience. Thus, even our deepest moral convictions are provisional hypotheses, tested by history, compassion, and reason. Popper's moral realism is pragmatic, not absolute. We cannot know the final good, but we can recognize and minimize suffering. The moral task of civilization is not to make heaven, but to prevent hell. Popper's epistemology of science and his moral political philosophy are two sides of the same coin. Both arise from a single insight. Knowledge grows through error. In the laboratory, we refute hypotheses. In the forum, we challenge ideologies. In life, we question ourselves. Every sphere of thought becomes a field of self-correction. What matters is not who is right, but how we treat wrongness. Do we suppress dissent or learn from it? Do we cling to belief or adapt to reason? This continuous dynamic process is what Popper calls the rational attitude. It demands courage to expose one's ideas to criticism, to admit error publicly, and to change one's mind without humiliation. Popper's approach also redefines objectivity. For him, objectivity does not mean neutrality of the observer, but independence of the statement. A scientific claim is objective, not because the scientist is free from bias, but because it can be tested and criticized by anyone. Objectivity is social, not psychological. It depends on a community of inquirers bound by a tradition of open criticism and transparent evidence. Science, therefore, is a social institution of organized skepticism. Its norms, replicability, peer review, debate, are moral safeguards against error. They embody the same principles that sustain democracy: equality of voice, protection of dissent, and accountability to reason. In this way, Popper's work becomes a bridge between epistemology and ethics, science and politics. The logic of discovery mirrors the logic of liberty. Both demand openness, both depend on criticism, both thrive on fallibility. Whereas authoritarian politics mirrors pseudoscience, dogmatic, untestable, and immune to revision, free societies mirror scientific inquiry, self-correcting and perpetually incomplete. Truth in both domains is not a possession, but a pursuit. Popper often described himself as a rationalist, though not one who claims reason can prove everything. His rationalism is critical, not dogmatic. It is a method, not a faith. Reason becomes the art of error without despair. Popper's later work extends these ideas into evolutionary epistemology. He interprets knowledge as part of biological evolution, a process of trial and error, variation and selection. Organisms, like scientists, generate hypotheses about how to survive. Their actions test these hypotheses against reality. Failure is elimination. Success is provisional adaptation. In this light, knowledge is not uniquely human. It is the universe's way of learning about itself through living forms. From amoebas to astrophysicists, all life engages in conjecture and refutation.
This vision unites science and nature under a single principle. The growth of knowledge is an evolutionary phenomenon. Popper's universe, therefore, is not a finished order, but an open system of possibilities. Reality itself, like society and science, evolves through error and selection. The cosmos is creative, not mechanical. It surprises us because it is not predetermined. Human reason is one of its emergent tools for discovery, not its master. Thus, Popper's philosophy culminates in a profound humility, the recognition that knowledge, however vast, is always finite before the infinite unknown. Ignorance is not a flaw, but a frontier. The aim of reason is not to conquer mystery, but to expand the region where light meets shadow. His critique of verificationism, his defense of falsifiability, and his insistence on critical rationalism are united by a moral tone, a respect for truth-seeking even in uncertainty. He believes science is the most honest enterprise because it institutionalizes the confession of fallibility. Each failed experiment, each disproved hypothesis, is a moral victory against arrogance. In contrast, ideologies that pretend to be infallible, whether political, religious, or scientific, betray the human condition. For Popper, the truly rational individual is not one who never errs, but one who learns endlessly from error. Popper's influence rests not only on his theories, but on his intellectual temperament, a balance of boldness and modesty, confidence and humility. He believed that philosophy's true role was not to pronounce eternal truths, but to clarify how we pursue truth without self-deception.
The philosopher, in his view, is not a prophet or legislator of thought, but a critic, a person devoted to exposing hidden assumptions, contradictions, and fallacies that corrupt reasoning. This commitment to criticism makes Popper's philosophy a lifelong antidote to dogmatism, an ongoing reminder that even our best ideas are only steps along an endless path of discovery. He saw intellectual life as a dialogue between daring conjecture and relentless testing, a partnership between imagination and discipline. To think rationally, one must be imaginative enough to propose bold hypotheses, but disciplined enough to accept their destruction when evidence refutes them. This, for Popper, is the courage of reason, the courage to risk being wrong in pursuit of what might be right. The moral core of Popper's thought lies in this courage. He once remarked that the growth of knowledge depends on the willingness to be refuted, and that civilization itself depends on this intellectual virtue. Without it, science degenerates into propaganda and politics into tyranny. The refusal to allow criticism transforms truth into dogma and authority into infallibility. Hence, the defense of critical thinking is not a mere academic concern, it is the defense of human dignity. Freedom of thought is valuable not because it guarantees correctness, but because it allows continual correction. This logic applies as much to the individual conscience as to institutions. Each of us, in Popper's view, must live by the same principle as science itself. Remain open to evidence, tolerant of dissent, and vigilant against the seductions of certainty. Popper's battle with the Vienna Circle exemplifies this stance. Though often associated with the positivists, he stood against their central doctrine, that knowledge grows by induction from observation. Popper reversed the formula. Knowledge grows not from accumulation, but from elimination. We do not climb toward truth by stacking confirmations, but by discarding errors. He thus redefined progress as the systematic destruction of falsehoods. Science, in this light, is not the construction of a final edifice of truth,
but the endless remodeling of a structure always under renovation. This metaphor expresses a deep optimism. We may never finish the building, but each repaired foundation and improved design brings us closer to understanding. That optimism, however, was tempered by realism. Popper did not believe that reason could solve all problems. He knew that emotions, interests, and traditions shape human life in ways beyond logic's reach. But he insisted that these forces, though powerful, must always be held accountable to criticism. Rationality, in his sense, is not the domination of emotion, but its guidance by reflection. It is a discipline that protects passion from turning into fanaticism. When feeling becomes blind, reason is its conscience. When reason becomes cold, feeling reminds it of its humanity. Popper's balanced vision of a world governed neither by irrational impulse nor by sterile rationalism reflects his conviction that truth-seeking is an ethical enterprise as much as an intellectual one. This ethical tone pervades his political writings. In The Open Society and Its Enemies, he launches one of the 20th century's most powerful defenses of liberal democracy. He portrays democracy not as the rule of the majority, but as the system best designed to allow peaceful change of power and correction of errors. The true question, he says, is not who should rule, but how can we get rid of bad rulers without bloodshed? This redefinition transforms politics from a struggle for control into a process of continual reform. Just as scientists replace bad theories with better ones, citizens must replace bad policies with improved alternatives. Both processes depend on institutions that tolerate criticism. Thus, democracy is not justified by the wisdom of the people, but by the humility of the system. In contrast, totalitarian ideologies, whether of the right or the left, promise certainty. They claim to know the meaning of history, the destiny of nations, the nature of justice. Popper regarded this as intellectual sin, the arrogance of pretending to possess what no human can. He traced this arrogance back to Plato, whose ideal of philosopher kings he saw as the prototype of political authoritarianism. Plato's vision of a perfectly ordered society, ruled by those who supposedly know the truth, struck Popper as the earliest philosophical blueprint for tyranny. By contrast, an open society must reject the dream of perfect order and embrace the risk of freedom. Its stability comes not from unanimity, but from the resilience of institutions that survive dissent. Popper's critique of Marxism follows similar logic. He admired Marx's moral passion, but condemned his historicism, the belief that history follows scientific laws leading inevitably to socialism. For Popper, this was pseudoscience, a brand prophecy masquerading as analysis.
He pointed out that any theory claiming to predict the course of history immunizes itself against refutation by explaining away contrary evidence as temporary deviation. Such a system is unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific. Worse, it encourages authoritarian control, since those who claim to understand history's laws see themselves as entitled to enforce them. Popper's warning proved prophetic in the 20th century, when totalitarian regimes invoked scientific socialism to justify repression. The antidote to this is his notion of piecemeal social engineering. Societies should change not through revolutionary leaps, but through incremental, testable reforms. Each reform should be treated as a hypothesis, subject to correction if it produces unforeseen harm. This pragmatic method mirrors scientific procedure, bold proposals tempered by critical feedback. It avoids the moral catastrophe of utopian planning, where the ends justify any means.
Popper understood that when a society seeks perfection, it ends by destroying its capacity to improve. A good system is not one that eliminates all problems, but one that can recognize and repair them. Hence, fallibility becomes a virtue, not a weakness. In epistemology, Popper's concept of World 3 deepens his realism. He distinguishes between three realms: World 1, the physical universe; World 2, the subjective realm of consciousness; and World 3, the objective world of knowledge, ideas, theories, and cultural products. World 3 is autonomous once created. It influences us as much as we create it. Scientific theories, for instance, exist independently of individual minds once articulated. They can be studied, criticized, and improved by others. Thus, knowledge has a life of its own. It evolves like an organism, adapting and competing within the ecology of ideas. This triadic ontology bridges materialism and idealism. It respects the reality of physical nature, the autonomy of mind, and the objectivity of knowledge. It portrays human culture as a self-developing layer of reality within the broader cosmos. From this emerges a striking vision of human destiny. We are not passive observers of the world, but active participants in its unfolding. Through our theories, art, and institutions, we create realities that in turn shape us. Our freedom lies not in mastering nature, but in engaging creatively with its challenges. Popper's philosophy of knowledge thus becomes a philosophy of participation. Every act of understanding is a contribution to the universe's self-discovery. In this light, error acquires a sacred dignity. It is the mark of genuine participation in the adventure of knowing. Popper's final philosophical position is a grand synthesis of fallibilism, moral responsibility, and the optimism of reason. He envisions humanity as a species that learns not through revelation, but through correction. A creature destined to err and to rise again by confronting its errors with honesty. This vision is not tragic, but heroic. It replaces the myth of omniscient gods with the dignity of finite minds striving for truth. For Popper, the greatness of humanity lies precisely in its incompleteness. We are not gods condemned to certainty. We are seekers blessed with doubt. To know that we do not know is the beginning of all wisdom and the safeguard of all freedom. This humility before the unknown defines the moral atmosphere of his philosophy. He believed that arrogance of knowledge is the root of cruelty. When people think they possess ultimate truth about race, class, religion, or destiny, they cease to see others as equal participants in the search for understanding. They impose instead of persuading. They destroy instead of debating. Thus, epistemological arrogance becomes ethical barbarism. Against this, Popper offered the ideal of critical dialogue, a world in which individuals engage one another through reason rather than force. His open society is not merely a political structure, but a moral aspiration, a community built on the acknowledgement that we may all be wrong, and that this shared fallibility binds us in mutual respect. He often said that the history of science is the history of bold ideas that died for the sake of progress. Each refuted theory leaves behind a residue of truth, a clearer understanding of what the world is not. The scientist's courage to let go of cherished beliefs is, for Popper, a model for civilization itself. Progress depends on intellectual sacrifice, the willingness to discard comforting certainties for uncomfortable truths. This moral of science transcends the laboratory. It applies to all human institutions, from religion to politics, from art to morality. Only a culture that values self-correction can endure without stagnation or tyranny. In this sense, Popper's work is a philosophy of growth. He conceives of knowledge, society, and morality as open processes, never completed, always advancing through struggle and reflection. Perfection, he argues, is the enemy of progress, for it ends the conversation.
A perfect system leaves no room for improvement, no need for criticism, no space for freedom. An open system, by contrast, survives precisely because it never closes. Its imperfection is its strength. It welcomes the unforeseen, the different, the challenging, because it understands that vitality lies in variation. Just as biological evolution thrives on mutation, intellectual and social evolution thrive on dissent. The metaphor of evolution illuminates his entire worldview. In Objective Knowledge, Popper describes all learning as a Darwinian process of trial and error elimination. Organisms propose solutions through behavior. The environment tests them. Those that fail are eliminated. Those that succeed persist, though always provisionally. Similarly, theories are variations tested by experience. Errors perish, and the survivors become the basis for new conjectures. Thus, life itself is the logic of discovery made flesh. Through this analogy, Popper reconciles the biological and intellectual realms, showing that the same creative principle, variation under constraint, governs both genes and ideas. Popper's late reflections often turned to ethics. He argued that while we can never know what is absolutely good, we can know what is evil, pain, oppression, ignorance, cruelty. Therefore, morality should focus not on constructing heaven, but on preventing hell. This negative utilitarianism is pragmatic and compassionate. Reduce suffering wherever possible, and you have already advanced the human cause. Such modest ethics avoids the danger of perfectionist ideologies while preserving moral seriousness. It recognizes that the measure of civilization lies in the degree to which it protects individuals from avoidable harm. In this, Popper's ethics mirrors his epistemology: progress through elimination of error, whether intellectual or moral. At the heart of his thought is faith, not in any transcendent power, but in human rationality itself. Despite his critique of absolute knowledge, he never abandoned a belief that truth exists, even if we can never fully grasp it. He called this a regulative ideal, the lighthouse guiding our endless voyage through uncertainty. Truth is real, but our access to it is fragmentary. What matters is not possession, but pursuit. Science, democracy, and morality all depend on this faith, that honesty, criticism, and open dialogue bring us closer to reality. Without this hope, reason becomes sterile skepticism. With it, reason becomes a creative adventure. Popper's legacy is immense. He reshaped the philosophy of science by replacing verification with falsification. He reframed political theory by replacing authority with criticism. He redefined rationality as a method of humility rather than domination. Across these domains runs a single thread: the idea that progress is born from error recognized and corrected. To err is human, but to learn from error is civilization. That principle, applied consistently, transforms both the scientist's laboratory and the citizen's conscience into arenas of freedom. Toward the end of his life, Popper wrote that our knowledge can only be finite, while our ignorance must necessarily be infinite. In those words lies the spiritual essence of his thought. They express awe before the cosmos, reverence for truth,
and acceptance of limitation. Popper's philosophy, because the revealed is surrounded by the vast darkness of the unknown. Yet this darkness is not despair, it is invitation. Each generation inherits not final answers, but better questions. Each mind continues the conversation of humanity with reality. To live philosophically, Popper suggests, is to join that dialogue, to test one's beliefs against the world, and to prefer the hard path of inquiry over the soft comfort of certainty. In the end, Karl Popper's message is profoundly simple. Everything human is fallible, but everything fallible can improve. Truth is not a monument, but a motion. Freedom is not a gift, but a discipline. Knowledge is not the conquest of mystery, but the art of coexisting with it. What redeems our errors is our courage to face them. And what makes us rational beings is not that we know, but that we care enough to keep asking. That, for Popper, is the true spirit of science, the true foundation of freedom, and the enduring heart of philosophy itself.